It's 9 o'clock, April 11th, and I'd like to call the meeting to order, please. Let's see, invocation will be by our own Stan Bowling, and Commissioner Wesley Davis will do the pledge to the flag. Please rise.
Let's pray. Father God, we come before you this morning thanking you that you are God. We bring to you this morning a mixed bag. We bring belief and doubt, sin, and at least some desire to do good. And we put these things at your feet, and we ask you to make something of it. We are grateful that you work through strengths, and that many times you choose to work through weaknesses. And we bring you both this morning. We ask that you would take what we bring to you and make something good of it. And we ask this in your name. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We're almost all together on that.
We're getting better at it. By our second year, we're going to have it.
Under additions and deletions to the agenda, we have one item. It was some additional backup on item number, well, I don't know what item, but it was page 198A, and that was all.
9A1.
Item number 9A1.
So move. I'll second that, Mr. Chairman.
We have a motion to approve the agenda as amended. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. We have no proclamations and presentations. Item 6 is approval of minutes. Item 6A, public workshop, March 3rd, 2006. Proposed proportionate share ordinance.
Move to approve, Mr. Chairman, as printed. Second.
Moved and seconded to approve the minutes. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Item 6B is the regular meeting of March 7th, 2006.
Move approval.
Moved and seconded. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Item 6C, regular meeting of March 14th, 2006.
Move approval. Second.
Been moved and seconded. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Item 7, consent agenda.
Move approval.
Second.
Been moved to approve the consent agenda as submitted. All in favor? Any discussion?
Nope.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Under item 8, constitutional officers and governmental agencies, nothing. Public items. We have a public hearing, 9A1. Treviso LLC's request to rezone plus or minus 19.48 acres from A1 to RM8. Bob?
Good morning. I'm Bob Keating. I'm County Community Development Director. This is a proposed rezoning with the request to change the zoning of a piece of property from agricultural A1, which allows residential development at a density of 1 unit per 5 acres, to RM8, which is residential multifamily up to 8 units an acre. This is really an appeal of a denial by the Planning and Zoning Commission of the applicant's request for RM8 rezoning. The Planning and Zoning Commission denied the RM8 but recommended that RM6 zoning be established on the subject property. This slide shows the subject property outlined in green. It's on the east side of 74th Avenue. It's just north of 16th Street. It's essentially a 20-acre parcel. It comes in at 19.48 acres. It's currently zoned A1, and the request is to change the zoning to RM8. And the purpose of the rezoning is to get the zoning district that will allow development consistent with the density of the RM8 district. As I mentioned, the Planning and Zoning Commission did consider this rezoning request, and at its meeting on February 23rd, it voted 4-3 to deny the requested RM8 zoning and instead recommended rezoning the property to RM6, and the applicant subsequently appealed that denial. This graphic shows the existing land uses in the area. The subject property is an old grove with one single-family house on it. North of the subject properties, an old grove. To the west of the subject property and across 74th Avenue is the Westlake Estates subdivision.
Bob,
Yes.
Can I interrupt you just for a second? On the motion that was made and in the backup, it appears that, I'm just wondering if this is accurate. The motion, and then Mr. Christopher said he was going to vote no, but yet the no vote was Bruce, Christopher, and Keys. And I'm just wondering if that was, and the way what they were, I guess what the motion was to pass this as multifamily 6 units per acre, or your recommendation. That passed, but yet Christopher said, I'm sorry. Strike that. Go on. I just figured it out.
You didn't stay at Holiday Inn, did you?
No.
Oh, dear.
Got up too early this morning. I'm sorry for the interruption, Mr. Keating.
Yeah, go ahead, Bob.
He's planning that, Bob.
Chairman, let that get by.
What was the question? What was the question?
Back to existing land
Better
uses.
start from the beginning for Gary.
Yeah, he was trying to figure out Mr. Christopher's vote.
Okay.
As I said, on the west side of 74th Avenue is Westlake Estates. That's a developed subdivision that's zoned RS1, and it's actually developed at a density of 0.68 units per acre. On the east side of the subject property are some large wooded single-family lots with houses on them, and to the south of the subject property, outside of the urban service area, is part of the Point West development. Actually, one of their golf holes goes just south of 16th Street, which is just south of the subject property. For this rezoning, like all the others, we looked at several criteria. We looked at concurrency, we looked at comp plan consistency, we looked at environmental impact, and we looked at compatibility with the surrounding area. In this case, there is not any concurrency problem. There's capacity in all the concurrency facilities to accommodate development on the subject property at the requested density. In terms of consistency with the comp plan, we looked at this a little closer after the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, and in our staff report to the P&Z, we didn't point out a couple of the policies that we have pointed out in the staff report that you have. These are policies that really relate to compatibility, so we had addressed the issue with the Planning and Zoning Commission. We just didn't cite these policies. While the proposed rezoning is consistent with the land use map, because the land use map identifies this area as M1, which does allow up to 8 units per acre, and the RM8 zoning district is allowed in the M1 land use designation, and therefore it's consistent with the land use map. There are several other policies in the comp plan that staff feels the request is not consistent with. And there are two policies in particular that I'd like to call your attention to, which indicate that the request isn't consistent with the comp plan, but also support the findings that staff made with respect to compatibility. And those are policies 1.41 and 1.45 of the future land use element. And this is addressed in staff's report that you have in your backup. First of all, policy 1.41 essentially says that not every zoning district allowed in a land use designation is appropriate for every site in that land use designation. And that's a policy that's been in the comp plan for several years. And the policy is in there to recognize that land use designations are sometimes pretty large. There are a number of zoning districts that are consistent with the land use designations, and just because a particular property has a certain land use designation, that doesn't mean that it should have the highest, most intense, highest density zoning district that is consistent with that land use designation. And I'm going to go into this a little bit more when we talk about compatibility with the surrounding area. The other policy I want to reference is policy 1.45 of the future land use element. And just to paraphrase that policy, it says that vacant property shall have transition area comparable to that of adjacent built property. And this is a policy that was recently put in the comp plan when the plan was amended in the past year. And essentially, this policy was put in after the board considered, I think, the Kennedy rezoning on the north side of State Road 60, which has some parallels to this. Because, again, it was a request for a higher density multifamily zoning district adjacent to a built low-density single-family subdivision. So essentially, the board at that time adopted a policy that requires a transition between a proposed higher density development and an existing lower density development. So basically, because of those two policies, in particular, staff has determined that the proposed RM8 zoning district is not consistent with the comp plan. We do, however, feel that RM6 would be an appropriate zoning district.
Or RS.
Or RS6. So that's the staff's finding and staff conclusion with respect to consistency with the comp plan. From an environmental standpoint, staff feels that there won't be any significant adverse effects with the proposed rezoning. This is an old grove. The trees are not in good shape. It looks like it's an abandoned grove. So it's an altered site, and it's not a significant environmental community. In terms of compatibility, and this is where the two policies that I referenced come in, staff feel that the RM8 would not be compatible in this area, and there are a few reasons for that. First of all, if you look at this slide, you'll see all of the property abutting the subject property has a density of 6 units per acre or less. There's RM6 to the north, there's RM6 to the northwest, and then a little further east, there's RM6. In fact, there's almost no RM8 on the area represented by this slide. And as I said, there's the low-density single-family Westlake Estates on the west side of 74th Avenue, and the southern boundary of this property is the urban service area boundary. Now, we do have Point West that is located outside the urban service area adjacent to this property, but still it is a urban service area boundary. And typically the county's position with respect to rezoning property in the M1 land use designation in the State Road 60 corridor is to allow the higher density zoning districts like RM8 closer to State Road 60, and as you get further away from State Road 60 to allow a lower density zoning district like RM6. So essentially that's staff's position. Staff feels that the RM8 is not compatible with surrounding areas, but we feel that the RM6 would be. So basically, staff's conclusion is that the proposed RM8 zoning isn't consistent with the comp plan, although it does meet the concurrency test and there won't be any adverse environmental impacts. It's also not compatible with surrounding uses. So based on that, staff's identified 3 alternatives that the board has. The board can approve the RM8 as requested. The board can deny the RM8, which would leave the property zoned A1 agricultural, and staff does not recommend that. Or you could approve rezoning the property at a lower density zoning district, and particularly staff and the Planning and Zoning Commission recommend that you do take the third alternative and rezone the property to RM6.
Thank you, Mr. Keating. Any questions of Mr. Keating? Sandra?
Yes, or RS6.
Or RS6.
To
Any other
complete the
questions?
sentence.
Yeah, I have a question. If this is, depending on what we do here, let's say this is, the appeal is denied, then they can't come back. Do they then end up with what planning and zoning did? Do they end up with nothing and they have to wait a year to reapply, or what happens if the appeal is denied?
It's been advertised for RM8, which is what they've requested. You have the ability to grant that zoning or any zoning consistent with the M1 category, even if it's a lower density today. They would not have to wait a year if you chose to follow the Staff and Planning and Zoning Commission recommendation to rezone it to RM6 rather than RM8.
Okay.
What about RS6?
I believe that's also an allowable zoning district within the M1 land use category.
Any further questions?
Everything
I
over
think-
single
Gary, you done?
Yeah, go ahead.
16th Street. What is the status of 16th Street?
It's a two-lane road.
If Jim Davis is here, he can probably explain it, but basically, the county is looking at acquiring the rest of the right-of-way necessary, and hopefully it's going to be improved within the next year.
Okay.
Anything further? Before I open the public hearing, I think I need to swear in the people who are speaking. Is that true?
It's a quasi-judicial hearing, and it's your procedure to swear in the witnesses,
Okay.
yes. The clerk would...
Anyone who wishes to speak, would you please stand and let the clerk administer the oath of...
Do you all swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you?
Thank you very much. All right, the public hearing is open. Anyone from the public wish to be heard? Would you please identify yourself at the microphone before you...
Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, my name is Charles Seaman, and my address is 433 Plaza Real, Boca Raton, Florida. I am a consulting land use planner and land use lawyer. My resume has previously been submitted to the record. The brief story is that I've been doing this for 32 years. I represent both the public and private sectors. I've represented 7 or 8 state governments, the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, counties, municipalities, regions, in regard to growth management and land use matters. And I'm here today on behalf of the Treviso, the applicant here. And my testimony is going to be both professional opinion and advocacy for the applicant, but I hope you'll take into consideration my observations and professional perspectives with regard to the issues that are before you. As an opening matter, it may seem that the difference between RM6 and RM8 is what are we arguing over. It's not much. But I'm going to suggest to you that the cumulative impact of failing to use the land in your urban service area efficiently and effectively will create long-term problems for this county. The fundamental failing of growth management, and you have a lot of concern in this county about the future, how fast you're growing and how you're growing. The fundamental failing of American growth management is we have planned areas for urban services. We have provided those urban services at great public expense, and then we have underutilized the land. And the consequences of that are increased housing costs, unavailability of land for public facilities, workforce housing problems, and increased cost to the public, because inefficient use of land means you're going to need more land to accommodate the growth that's going to come to this community. I grew up in West Palm Beach, and I have observed over the last 30-some-odd years as a professional and as a resident the changes that we've experienced. And I remember in the 70s when I was working in the governor's office and we were talking about managing or controlling growth. And I remember when we adopted the Growth Management Act in the mid-80s and we were going to manage and control growth. The concept was that if we pushed it down, it wouldn't come. But the reality is it comes. And the challenge, I believe, for this county as it is for everybody else is how do you accommodate it? And I think the worst mistake that anybody can make is to plan an area for urban development, to provide the facilities, and then when you come down to the hard choices of individual zoning matters, to zone it for less than it is. I did the simple math. For every parcel of land in this corridor that you reduce the density from the maximum planned and permitted and urban service level, you're going to need about a third of every square mile that you underzone. You're going to need another third of a square mile For every square mile, you're going to need another third of a square mile to accommodate the growth that is going to come, and is probably going to come in exurban environments outside where you've planned it and at new expense. Right now, this project, if it were approved for RM8, would pay about $400,000 more in impact, $400,000 in impact fees, with very little additional public improvements that are necessary and not already planned. If it goes, ultimately, those 2 units per acre somewhere else, that $400,000 will have to be used for new facilities that have to be paid for, not to repay what has been planned for. So that's the sum and substance of where we're going. We believe, if we could look at, I don't know how we got to that slide, the rezoning request is, we believe, consistent with your zoning code, and we do disagree with staff. We think staff had it right when they analyzed the comprehensive plan and told the Planning and Zoning Commission that it was consistent with the comprehensive plan. We believe the 2 policies which were invoked in the March 31st, if you read them carefully, they are an after-the-fact justification for a position that was regionally taken in terms of compatibility, for which there was no comprehensive plan basis. We pointed that out, and now they found to, but I'm going to explain to you how those really don't apply. There are numerous goals, policies, and objectives of the comprehensive plans which are implemented by the request, but there is a fundamental issue that I want to present to you. Your plan says shall guide development to the urban service area, shall. And then there's some plans, policies that say you may make some other decisions. I believe when you have a shall and a may on the same subject, that the shall controls. And I believe that that governs the outcome of this. The request meets concurrency for all public services, and it makes good planning sense to use the property efficiently. Indian River County will have an efficient, compact land use pattern. That's not RS6 in an area with urban service boundaries. By allowing the site to be developed in a manner that is consistent with the site's land use designation, the request allows a more compact land use pattern within the urban service area and reduces the chances that urban sprawl will occur. That's your staff's statement in the original report. Comprehensive plan, the medium density residential land use designation shall be applied to those areas which are suitable for urban scale development and intensities. That's your policy. This property is suitable for urban scale development and intensities. Those areas shall be limited to lands that are located within the urban services area and near existing urban centers, which of course the West Point project is an urban service area, which is a center which has been given a significant designation. You know where the urban service boundary is. You see where the subject property is. It's clearly within it. This is what I think is your most important single policy in your comprehensive plan. Indian River County shall encourage and direct growth into the 2020 urban service area through zoning, that's what we're here today about, subdivision and land development regulations. Another, you can skip over these, Matt, they're just more of the state. The county will implement future land use element policies which will restrict urban sprawl, limit strip commercial development, promote infill, encourage T&D, and encourage higher intensity uses in major corridors. The SR 60 is a major corridor. You didn't draw it to say the half distance closer to the highway is the corridor. You drew the boundary where it was at the end. And there's this underlying current and theme that soft boundaries are what ought to be the land use transition from the urban area to rural areas. And I'll submit to you that the successful growth management programs have hard boundaries, very clear lines where you have the urban development and you have rural development. And that this notion that there has to be some feathering doesn't make any sense. Now, I want to address at this point, and I'm sorry that it wasn't prepared better, but these 2 policies which have just been raised by staff. And I want to start with 1.41. Staff has told you, both in their written report and here this morning, that in their opinion, the RM8 is in conflict with or is inconsistent with policy 1.41. I want to read the language to you. Where medium density residential lands abut low density residential lands, the medium density land may be zoned in intermediate density. Now, just as a matter of language and plain meaning, I don't know how anything can be inconsistent with a may, which is not you shall. It says you may. And so invoking that as a basis for determining that the RMA is inconsistent with your comprehensive plan, I believe is just wrong as a matter of simple and plain language and meaning and intent. Because, conceitedly, saying RM8 or RM6 both may be appropriate. So to suggest that it's inconsistent with that comp plan under the definition in the statute, I believe is in error. I believe that the may in this case has to be considered in the context of the mandatory shall in your comprehensive plan policy, which says you shall guide development to the urban service area. A recurring theme that you're going to hear from me until I'm through, over and over again. The whole purpose of the urban service boundary is to bring integrity to your pattern of development, to promote development in that area, and by the way, promote harmonious development. The second is policy 1.45. When vacant land within the urban service area, that's us, is located adjacent to developed property that is built to a density lower than the allowed density of the vacant property, that's the RS1 subdivision, which is to the west of the property. The vacant property shall have a transition area next to the built property with a density in that transition area comparable to that of the built property. It doesn't say it shall be zoned in a land use classification under the zoning code or the land development regulations, which is the same. What it says is there shall be a transition area, and I would submit to you that in designing where that, what that transition area is a site plan approval process, not a zoning classification. But more importantly, if you look at this parcel of land, the arrow that I'm going to show you shows the land to the west. The north is to the right. That land is on the other side of a road that has a 60-foot right-of-way, on the other side of a canal with a 100-foot right-of-way. And then, as you'll notice, Matt, go ahead to the next, the buildings are actually set back a significant difference from the boundary line. And so all of that area, which is in green, I suggest to you constitutes a significant transition area, not zoning district, not zoning boundary line, but transition area between one land use and another land use. Now, I don't happen to know the facts of the case that were referred to earlier here, but I would submit to you, if you look in performance zoning, for example, the classic planning text on compatibility of adjacent land uses, you'll find that a transition area of this distance, of this character, the road in the subdivision is between the property and the neighboring property. And I would submit to you that if there's any question, that should be considered here as opposed to when the site plan comes in. This, by the way, is just a conceptual site plan, but it's what we're talking about, and I'm using it to illustrate the concepts. The proper time to consider this is when the site plan is approved, but if it's relative here today, I believe that the transition area which you see, which has no dwelling units in it per acre, is more than sufficient to meet both the intent and the letter of policy 1.45. Next slide. Their criteria for rezoning, I'm going to skip through them. I don't think there's any dispute. Just real quickly, the first is the subject property adjacent to other multifamily. Yes. Next. By the way, if you look in the lower, the Point West project, I think when you talk about what's the character of the area and compatibility, you don't just look at the properties that abut it. You look at the neighborhood. And this functional neighborhood is largely all going to be oriented around the urban center at Point West. And in that context, I think that the compatibility is fairly self-evident. Next. Rezoning. Is the property adjacent to employment centers? Yes. Next. Along arterial and collector roads? Yes. Next. Adjacent to commercial uses? Yes, the town center is, Point West is less than a very short distance away, 2 of them. Next. Does the subject property not abut single-family on all sides? It does not. It abuts T&D, PD, T&D. It abuts RM6. Next. Concurrency, there's no dispute. We agree with the concurrency analysis. As I said, we disagree with the comprehensive plan analysis presented today. We did agree with the comprehensive plan analysis previously submitted. And I've already told you that we think that the no, I won't address the RS6. It's been raised here today. It was raised at the Planning and Zoning Board. I would like to impress upon you that the RS6 district doesn't allow any reasonable density given the urban services that are have been provided to this area. RS6 doesn't produce 6 units to the acre. It'll produce something in the mid-3s, classic sprawl density. And that's because of the setbacks and the lot sizes requirements and what can be effectively yielded. And so I would pray to you, even if you find me unpersuasive, that you not seriously consider RS6, because I think that really, in many ways, throws out the baby with the bathwater. Next, we've talked about the compatibility analysis. I want to try not to go too far along on this, but we think you have to look at the area. And frankly, making a compatibility analysis in this area, which you see on this aerial photograph, I think you need to look to the future and not be bound to the past. You've planned this for future urban development. And I would submit to you, in that landscape that we're looking at, and we're looking to the west, we're looking away from the urban area, that this area is, this whole area, that RM8, when you take it into account, is appropriate. And I want to suggest to you that we've come a long ways away from Euclidean zoning, where we zone stuff all to be the same. In fact, we've recognized that a diversity of housing products, a diversity of tenses, a diversity of housing costs is what makes a community livable and sustainable. And you've really invested in that to the west. And we think you should continue it not just on those areas, but throughout this. I want to suggest to you, if I can, that the difference between RM6 and RM8 in terms of community character, this compatibility issue, is really no difference at all. The real difference is, are there adequate public facilities? Because I'll submit to you that you can't tell the difference between an RM6 townhouse project and an RM8 townhouse project. I can't. Because if you build RM8 at an average of 1,250 square feet, it's going to produce about 195,000 square feet of building volume. And if you build RM6 at 1,800 square feet, that's absolutely permitted under your zoning. There's no regulation of the sizes. It's going to be the same square footage. And in fact, we know from experience all over South Florida, as densities get pushed down, developers have no choice but to increase the square footage so that they can distribute the cost of the land over a certain number of square feet. And I would submit to you, if this property were developed at RM6 or it was developed at RM8, in 5 years and in 10 years from now, people in the neighborhood won't know the difference. The building won't change. That site plan could be either RM6 or RM8. The only thing that would change is the square footage of the units. And what guides the square footage of the units is 2 things: the market and what it costs to produce. And there's a market for both, as you well know, in this community. And I submit to, as a Board of County Commissioners, that you have an obligation not just to serve those who can afford the biggest and the best, but to provide for the housing needs of all of our community, all of our citizens. And that's a bunch of different households. There's some people who just live by themselves. There's some people who have 3 children. But what we're doing all over South Florida is, through our land development regulations, we are producing, by restricting the opportunity to develop, particularly in our urban services areas, the ability to produce a diversity of housing types. And so I would encourage you to be attentive to those implications. It's not simply a matter, but I want to tell you that I'm confident that if this project is built as RM8, and we're not here for a site plan, but this is a group of people who do good things. They have professional background in planning. This is what we're talking about at RM8. And in that product, whether it's a 6 or an 8, is just the square footage in the units.
That sound is a cell phone. Does everyone have their cell phones turned off?
I've left mine outside.
Even if it's on mute, it will still
Nope.
interrupt our... Okay, thank you.
Regrettably, I learned that lesson somewhere else. Compatibility does not mean likeness. In fact, what your comp plan, when it does talk about land use patterns in, actually it's your land development regulations, it talks about the word harmonious, a harmonious pattern. Well, I would suggest to you that harmony doesn't mean the same. In fact, a four-part harmony is four voices singing in different pitches, but they sing in a way that they fit together. And I would suggest to you, in analyzing the quote-unquote compatibility issue, you need to be thinking about how do we accommodate this diversity of voices, our various households, our various household needs, in an area which we plan for urban services, and in a way that fits together. And I would submit to you that the sketch I showed you shows the objective we're trying to achieve. And in fact, your plan says Indian River County will have a diverse mix of land uses, development patterns, housing densities, and housing types. 30% of the county's housing units will be in multifamily or traditional neighborhood design. Again, we believe that what we're doing is exactly what you've said. And in fact, in some ways, there's a set of rules that you all have adopted, some clear mandatory policies in your comprehensive plan, and some criteria for getting approval. And we think that our client has submitted a plan that meets all those. But suddenly, compatibility isn't in the criteria in your land development code for amendments to the LDRs as we're here on today. It talks about harmonious and efficient land use patterns. That's what your comp plan talks about. And I've already talked about these two policies that have been invoked at the late moment as a justification for compatibility. Let me jump through to the last, the workforce housing. Our client is seriously committed to building a product that they and the county can be proud of, and they genuinely believe what I've said to you today about the diversity of housing types and products. And if it would make a difference to this board in granting the RM8, they're prepared to provide or enter into appropriate restrictions that the difference between RM6 and RM8, those 39 units, 30, Matt, am I wrong? 39 units, would be restricted at initial sale and for a period of 5 years to a certain percentage of the median household income in this county. And to give you actual assurances that those 39 units will be made available at a ratio ranging between 25% that would be 3 times median household income and 25% that would be 3.33 and 25% that would be 3 times 3.66 and 25% of those would be times 4. And those numbers all come in and very favorably to the median housing value that was just published at $249,000 in this county. If that would make a difference, they would be prepared to enter into an appropriate agreement, covenant, whatever, to that property that would have those units be made available to qualified households with median income or below, and to prove to you that they're not blowing smoke up here to try to get more density. They're prepared to put their money where my mouth has been, that this is a project that fits into your comprehensive plan, and that we hope that you will give serious consideration and to approve. I just would like to close by saying that we think this complies with your comp plan. We think it meets your land development regulations, both the spirit and intent and letter of your regulations. With all due respect to staff, I understand that there are concerns about the development. I understand that everybody wants to try to control density. I would just leave you, regardless of this client, density is not the enemy. It's where and how density is located that is the problem. We've known about the cost of sprawl since Dr. Tony Downs wrote The Cost of Sprawl in 1972. Regrettably, through my entire career, we've done very little to avoid those consequences. You have an opportunity a little bit here to say, we designated this for urban service areas. It's an appropriate land use. It's RM. Staff has said it's a multifamily. It's appropriate for multifamily development. There's no dispute that all required facilities are available. That's really the principal characteristic of why density is important, is do you have the facilities to serve it? We can make projects that are 12 and 14 and 2, all of them attractive with appropriate landscape material and design and character. We can make them compatible. We do it all the time. It's being done in the TND just to the west of us. The rezoning request is consistent with established planning practices. We just don't think it makes any fiscal sense to say this is an area which we're planning for 8 units to the acre. We're going to provide the public facilities to get your comprehensive plan approved by the the state of Florida as having adequate public facilities planned for the development which is accommodated. And then when an individual rezoning comes in, we're not going to do it. The idea that you should reduce the density as you get closer to the boundary of a land use category makes sense, and we often do it. But the urban service boundary is not a land use category. It's a public facilities area. It's an area that you've chosen to make these facilities available for. And because it transitions to the TND, I think it's irrelevant in this point. But again, if you plan the entire urban service area for urban development and then feather the densities so that 1/2 of the land isn't used up to the planned intensity and the planned improvements, then you're not achieving the fiscal integrity which the urban service area is intended to meet. We think the 39 workforce housing units that CJM is willing to commit to would make a significant contribution to the community, set an appropriate standard that you might want to follow. They're good people, and they want to build a good product, and they ask for your support.
Thank you, Mr. Seaman. Are there any questions of Mr. Seaman? None? Thank you. I had a couple little questions. You mentioned the slight difference between the 6 and the 8, and you can't see it from the outside, and I agree with that. But those other 39 units are going to contribute to traffic and the other facilities that we have to make available.
But that's what concurrency looks to analyze. And I would be the first to say, if we couldn't meet concurrency, if we weren't within the planned intensity of facilities that are available, then density would be material, absolutely. But here what's happening is the planned standard is here, and we're now talking about doing less than that. And that's where I think the leg that the recommendation and the P&Z's action, I think, stands on is compatibility. And on that, I think I've made my point. But concurrency really is the most rigorous, adequate public facilities requirement in the United States. And this one, fortunately, meets it.
Yeah. And with regards to the single-family development across 66th Avenue, you sort of discount that by saying, well, the buffer is the road and the canal. But then you call the Point West Commercial Center adjacent, which is probably a half mile away. You know, one is adjacent and one isn't adjacent. But
I believe in looking at the area as a planned area. You're not going to have commercial on every street. You don't want to have commercial on every street. You want to have centers. And the centers ought to be organized around 1, 3, and 5 mile circles. We're within that 1 mile circle. That's the way compact is. Your plan says don't have strip commercial. Yeah. So in that context, I believe it is adjacent. It is nearby.
Well, so is the single family right directly across the street.
And I'm not diminishing that. I'm suggesting to you 2 things. One, the development of the transition area, what we normally call buffer yards, the buffer, how you're going to have that transition. There's a physical distance of something slightly less than 300 feet between that. It's not just the road. It's the road, the right-of-way of the canal, and the setback along the property line, and the location of the internal service road on that side, and the residences on this side that create, I believe, an appropriate and effective transition area. And I'm confident during site planning that those concerns are easily handleable. But I don't believe they're appropriate here today because we're talking about the appropriate classification. It's just where are the units, those RM8 units laid out on the site plan. We showed you one. If it was the county's desire to have reorganized so that more of the stormwater management facilities are located as additional transition area. That's what we do at site plan.
Okay, that's understood.
Chairman?
Thank you. Yes, you have a question?
Yeah,
Mr. Wheeler?
as long as we're talking to him now, I got several. One of Bob Keating, the first one, the property to the east that's RS6, what's that actually developed at?
Oh, the
Looks like
property
much larger lots is the reason.
directly to the east are just some unplatted lots.
Right, okay, but all the way, you've got some A1 in between, and then you got
Right.
RS6.
And you've got little portion subdivision and another subdivision there. I would guess it's probably
Yeah, that looks like Greenberg.
2.5 to 3 units per acre.
Okay. And then the other is when I look at this transitional zone for me, and everything I see in here, the multifamily is closer to Route 60. Just a comment. The other thing is
Matt, would you put up that slide? Could I just respond to that, sir?
yes.
I just want to show you this is the existing pattern that you've approved. You'll see the product, which is very, very close in the T&D. And I would submit to you that there is plenty of appropriate transition between these land uses.
Okay. That looks like their property is
It's
the
the-
8 units, I guess, no, right there.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
the property.
Oh, this is Point West, okay.
Yeah, it's Point West, which is on the south side of the same property. Yeah,
Okay.
unfortunately, the aerial's different.
The other thing is you mentioned in your opening remarks about by not utilizing our comp plan and putting as much in it as we possibly can, that we increase property costs, we increase housing costs, we decrease the availability of land. And as you were saying that, I'm thinking Miami, where densities are much higher, and all of these increases have occurred down there, but yet the cost of housing, the cost of property, the availability of land and everything else they're even worse off than we are, but yet they've expanded at high density. And when we talk about urban sprawl, you can have urban sprawl at 2 units per acre, or you can have urban sprawl at 30 units per acre. When you fill up something, and the sprawl is going to occur at some density. And then when you talk about the shall versus may, and you brought it up, I saw 2 different sections, and the first one where you said we shall, and I think we are doing what we said we shall do. And the second one, I think we have the option under the may to make some different decisions, but I don't see the definitions being as important in shall and may, and those is what they're talking about in that first section. I think we are doing what we said we shall do. In fact, you could put that up if you want to. Indian River County shall encourage and direct growth in 2020 urban service area through zoning, subdivisions, and land development regulations. And I think that's exactly what we're doing. We're just not doing it at the density you're requesting. We're doing it it's proposed at a different density.
With all due respect, sir,
yeah.
Your policy is that the reason for an urban service boundary is one of fiscal integrity. That is, when you invest, you and your citizens invest in public facilities, that you want them to be used wisely and efficiently. And I will submit to you, and I believe the record is pretty clear around the country, that development that has low intensity, less than the capacity of the facilities that have been put in, ends up having a negative fiscal impact on the community. And so by using these facilities less, my point to you is you're not implementing this. Because while it may be urban growth and it may be guided there, if it's not efficiently using the facilities which have been planned and are available.
Well, let me ask you, which facility, because our utilities, our landfill, our water, our sewer, I think they're being used efficiently. Our costs are in line or better than a lot of other counties. Our roads are certainly being used efficiently because they're overcrowded. So I don't know how efficient they are, but they're certainly being utilized. And we've got a low-density community that's much lower overall than 8 units per acre. But I don't see these problems. The other thing is I see, again, to repeat basically what I said about, take Miami, for instance. The larger the city, the larger the population, the higher the density. Generally, the higher the cost of living, not less. So it becomes less efficient rather than more efficient.
Well, I'm apologize that I can't explain to you, but study after study after study have shown that the more compact and more efficient the pattern of land use over time, the fiscal integrity of the community is substantially greater, and that at densities which approach in the range of average densities of 6 units per acre are not sustainable over time, and that you need to have areas which are planned for more intense development where you can provide. It still means the majority of the land is going to be at a lower intensity in the county, and that will always be the case here. But I would just encourage you strongly to consider that you're right at the tip point, in my opinion, of 8 units to the acre is probably the lowest urban intensity that has a significant opportunity for fiscal integrity, that is long-term efficiency, and that going below that ultimately will mean that there will be more land that will have to be converted to the urban service areas. I've had the honor of working for the city and county of Lexington, Kentucky, and Fayette County, oldest urban service boundary in the United States, established to protect primarily the horse country that surrounds the city. It was put in place in 1951. Unfortunately, during the intervening periods, while the land was planned for relatively intense uses, they aspired to a density in excess of average of 6 units to the acres. They actually only achieved about 2.5 for all the same reasons that you're talking about, community character and desires. And as a result, they've had a terrible time and ultimately had to consume almost 10 square miles of horse country to accommodate the various needs of the community in 1997. Now, I think we did a great job of planning those areas so that they would not have to expand it again in the future. And the plan won a great number of awards, et cetera. But I will tell you its average intensity in that area was over 11 units to the acre. In order to provide adequate opportunity to meet the needs of the community, to make the facilities reasonably affordable, and to avoid future expansion of the urban service boundary into what they regarded as a very precious resource.
Thank you. Any further questions of Mr. Seaman? Okay, we're still in the public hearing. Anyone else wish to be heard on this subject? Yes, sir? Yes, sir. No? Yes, ma'am.
I'm Will Barker, 7220 16th Street. I don't have a map, but I think you all know where my property is. I border 16th Street, and I go back 750-some feet. There, Mr. Cato's east boundary is my west boundary. Ronnie Baston owns the first 250 feet along their boundary, and I own the next 500 feet or so. I'm not really here to say a whole lot about whether it's 6 or 8 units to the acre. My big problem, maybe I'm a little early, I'm worried about what they're going to buffer it with, because I have a natural hammock along there. It's a beautiful patch of woods full of all kind of owls and wildlife and everything else. That's my choice. I like it that way. Talking about transition, everybody's talking about west of this place. East of this place, if they go 6 or 8 units to the acre, my barn and my stalls sit right there. I have an arena there that we play with the horses, and we raise heifers there and so forth. But I'm worried about what they're going to buffer it with if they jam all that right up against the boundary, 2-story or whatever it is. They may not want to look in at me shoveling manure, and I may not want to look at them taking a bath. I need a big something up there. But I do think 16th Street being a dirt road, I know it's going to be changed. We've gone through this before. I like it dirt. The more people that live next door, the more people are going to drive that road. The more the counties want to buy or take away some of my beautiful property between me and 16th Street. I don't want that to happen. I like to be where I am. I think the people next to me like to be where they are. I have one house in that 5 acres. The man north of me used to be Corley Park's property, has one house. Ronnie Baston's like 1 to the 1 acre, and there's a patch of woods between us and 71st Court. I would think the less number of people on that piece of property would impact it more. It would impact me more. It would impact 16th Street more. We have enough trouble with traffic from the charter school and the college coming by there and tearing my mailbox out once in a while, so less is better to me. Thank you.
Thank you. You are a little bit premature. When they come in for the site plan, you need to be here then.
But I wanted to say that.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? Yes, sir, Mr. Meckler.
Good morning, Chuck Meckling, 1999 Point West Drive. And I really don't believe, and I've not met any of these gentlemen, nor have I seen this project before, but I believe this could be a good case of it's 6 or 8 units to the acre. And this particular type of development concept wouldn't make an extreme amount of difference in the density. I think that what I would like to see is if they're going to develop this in the architecture that they've shown us, that's an asset. If they're going to do the proper buffering with landscaping, that can also be an asset. And if they're going to also voluntarily discuss some attainable housing within that community, I believe that too is an asset. Also, often we discuss what people are bringing to the table. If they do this the way that I think everybody here would like to see it done, I think that the concept of the 8 units could be as easily doable as the 6, and I think that they've made a good discussion and all that. One of the questions I might have for staff, as I understand, because that line going along 16th Street is in the urban service area, the expansion that we're going to be doing on 16th Street would be adequately sized for that amount of density through that area, wouldn't it, Bob? Or?
Yes.
So again, it's going to be a road system that's going to have monies put into it. I think that, again, using it to the best of the ability and getting the return on it through a tax base can be an asset as well. And I realize, too, just like Mr. Parker was saying, that it's a little early to discuss buffering effects, but I think, again, that can have so much to help in what the end result would be like in a community such as this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Meckling. Anyone else? Mr. Paladin?
Joseph Paladin, Chairman of the Growth Awareness Committee. Good morning, everybody. It's nice to see out-of-town developer addressing our problem with workforce housing here in the county. But I think we need if we're going to set some sort of precedence here or leave the door open as to how we're going to negotiate how we define workforce housing, I think we have to leave that up to us. And I think that under State Chapter 420, the numbers are slightly different than the numbers they proposed. And I think that under workforce housing, I won't make them go very, very low, which is another area we may have to use inclusionary housing to get to. But I would say very low, low, and moderate we should address. And that would be starting from the 60% of your median income, and then your low would be 61 to 80%, and then, of course, your moderate would be 80 to 120%. And I think that if we're going to use a zoning when we start negotiating these kind of things, instead of just making the 2 units an acre that you probably wouldn't give them anyway as part of what we would use for workforce housing, I'd like to get my 2 units an acre plus something, you know, if we're going to give them extra density, because they're not doing the 2 units an acre as charity. They're still going to make money on those houses. We have subdivisions that we've zoned and built, like the Trillium West and other projects that I've been part of, that they have townhome units starting in the 160s, and we didn't cut them any slack on workforce housing. So I think we just need to be able to govern what those numbers are ourselves, and I'd like to see this in the future, maybe setting a precedence if we're going to use density and zonings and what have you to make sure that workforce housing is a part of it. I would be all for that, and we'll be bringing forth that writing in the next couple of weeks, so I'd like to have that opening to where we could, control that. Thank you.
Well, that's one thing I like about this project, about what he said about workforce housing. What were they going to be at, 130-something thousand?
He said around 155 to 240 something, which, like I said, actually in State Chapter 424, right now we're defined from 104,000 to 215,000. But, I mean, you know, those numbers can be worked with as long as they're willing to work with us on that. I think that's a real asset. I'd like to see that as being a start of something that we see more as we rezone and approve site plans.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else wish to be heard? Mrs. Offutt?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. For the record, my name is Nancy Offutt. I represent the Treasure Coast Builders Association. I'm not speaking pro or against this rezoning, and I haven't talked to the applicant at all, but I would ask you to embrace some of the arguments that they made as far as the benefits of higher density within concurrency and in selected areas. It does serve a purpose. It does provide for more affordable housing and for market alternatives of different types of housing that people may choose. And when we talk about workforce housing, affordable housing, inclusionary zoning, and all of that, the builders are going to be expected to provide an awful lot of that, rightly or wrongly. Mr. Paladin said that in the RS 6 to 8 that they're not providing 2 units on charity. Well, I suggest they shouldn't have to provide it for charity. Workforce housing and affordable housing is a community-wide problem that needs to be addressed on a community-wide basis. It shouldn't be on the shoulders of the developer or the builder. So that being said, I do at least want you to hope you will embrace the arguments that were made as far as maximizing land use where it's appropriate. And I thank you for the time.
Good comments, Ms. Offutt. Anyone else? Mr. Johnson?
Bob Johnson, Coralwind Subdivision. I'm here to recommend that the rezoning be classified at a lower density of RS6. I think this is in more harmony with the Point West and would be, we spent a lot of time with the plan development for Point West, and I think that when the time comes for buffering, it makes it more compatible. I have another subject, and that is a while ago we discussed buying right-of-way at a fair value. Now, when you rezone from A1 to a RS6 or whatever, that automatically increases the right-of-way value when you go to buy it. So I would think that this ought to be considered when we rezone, that there ought to be some provision so that the county saves money by not buying right away at a higher price, and that this be taken in consideration in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I see we have that workforce housing. I can't quite see it because the lights are high. Can somebody readdress this item again? Mr. Seaman or Matt or whoever's running the screen needs to light it up a little bit for us.
The numbers range from a low of 166.5 to 222,000.
166.5 is the low?
166.5, 184.8, 2003, and 222.
166.5 would be in one of the 1,200 square foot units?
Those would be the smallest, the lowest cat. What we've really said to you is we'll produce 39 units, and they will be priced in these 4 categories. And I'm confident that the cost, the developer's cost, is going to be averaged over all of those units, all of the units, not just the units that are the lowest price are going to have the lowest finishes and the lowest per square foot cost. I think it's going to be spread over the entire project.
And these numbers are set in stone?
We're willing to talk about them, but there's some economic reality. We're not responding to a need that we've created. We believe that we should be able to have the RM8 without this consideration. But they've made an argument, I've made an argument, that part of it is to achieve a diversity, and what we're offering is to provide a diversity of a project. And I don't know the gentleman's prior projects, but the cost for production of housing are not what they were even 3 years ago. And but we're willing to, and what we tried to say is we're willing to work with the county to make those 9 units have some serious overture to workforce housing. We didn't say affordable as defined by the state statute. That's not practical. We all know that you can't do that just as a matter of market, right? But we're prepared to work with you if that's your pleasure. We just as soon take the RM8 and build it as all market rate without any restrictions. But to show our good faith and our genuine intentions, this is an offer that we've made, and we're prepared to work with the county to honor it.
Okay, and there are other caveats in there, such as resales and subleasing and things like that, I remember.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
One question, please, Mr. Chairman. Was that 32 or 39?
39.
39.
Right.
39 units.
10, 10, 10, and 9.
Right, didn't want to
Did
go
I
back.
misspeak? I apologize.
Mr. Chairman,
Anyone else? Yes.
I think the board needs to keep in mind that this request is for a straight rezoning. It can't be conditioned. It's not like a planned development where there's some bargaining in terms of design and conditions of approval.
Anyone else in the audience wish to be heard in this item? Last call. All right, I'm going to close the public hearing.
Mr. Chairman,
What's your pleasure? Yes.
Do we have a rebuttal from staff?
I had a comment.
I'd like to make a motion. We put it on the table for discussion, but I would move that we rezone this property as RS6.
Second for
Motion.
discussion.
Second. Sandra?
I asked again, do we have rebuttal from staff? I thought quasi-judicial, you had a format.
The staff has some comment?
Mr. Seaman had a lot of good points and a lot of points that we've made in the past, but I think a couple of the things are not correct. The policies that we cited, particularly policy 1.1, is discretionary in nature. It does give you the opportunity not to give someone the highest zoning district allowed in a comp plan designation. And the reason we cited that and said that the rezoning is inconsistent with that was because of the compatibility discussion that we have. Similarly, the other policy that we cited, 1.45, relates to there having to be a transition. So we think that we think appropriately that we determined that the RM8 is not consistent with the comp plan and it's not compatible. And the compatibility really is based on findings that the board has made in a lot of other instances, and essentially the policy and the criteria that has evolved because of that and is reflected really by inference in those couple of policies. So those are the points I'd make.
I've got one question, and I guess if you go back, the map that we have in the backup it's on our page 160, and it shows all the land around this proposed rezoning, and I see an even amount of RM6 compared to RS6, and I don't know if it's been time. Has RM6 generally been out there and RS6 has come along and taken that over? Is this an area that in essence should have been RM6?
Right. The RS6 that's out there, I think, is remnant RS6. The developed subdivisions or older subdivisions that have been there for quite a while. I think if this were a clean slate, that it would be developing multifamily.
And the new zoning that's been coming in out there has been RM6.
Right. That's correct.
The motion is RS6, is
Right.
that not right?
Yeah. Mr. Chairman?
I think that the RM6 probably fits it better. I'm on the verge. I'd almost go with the RM8 because, like the man said, you can't tell the difference from the outside anyway. The buildings don't look exactly the same.
I think the whole issue, too, Mr. Chairman, is, and we had this conversation, I think, with the property across, I'll get that. We had the property across from State Road 60 next to Indian River Estates. I think all that had the RM8, and I think one even had RM10, or maybe it was on this side, where we in our infinite wisdom had put all this in our comp plan. We in our infinite wisdom want to stop the urban service boundary right where it is. We in our infinite wisdom are trying to infill our urban service boundary. And now we're beginning to encroach on the urban service boundary, saying, well, no, let's lessen that zoning, even though it's supposed to be this in our plan. Let's lessen it, because we don't want that to be here. I think we have these in plans, and obviously we do have the right to make it an RS6. This does sit right on the urban service boundary. This does have the denomination of RM8. So someone in the history of our fathers have put this in there because they were trying to do good planning. And I'm kind of like Commissioner Newberger. I think as these areas come along and they're supposed to go there, and we just continue to knock them out and say, well, no, we don't want that there, then where do these things take place? I guess is my question.
Chairman? Yeah, I'd like to explain why I made the motion I made.
You don't have to explain it.
And the way that I'm looking at this is I look at 20th Street or Route 60, and along that we have some commercial RM8 maximum densities and so on and so forth. When you jump to the back half of that block of land, there's no through streets through there. The next street is 16th Street. You're going to be emptying all of this traffic from a higher density area onto that, which is a dirt road currently, which will be paved eventually. It's also surrounded by some ag land and large lots and large sections of land, and all single-family residential on the back half of that block of land. And then across the street you've got, in the canal, you've got the traditional neighborhood, which is outside the urban service area. And I kind of look at this as protecting single-family neighborhoods and where these people are, not unlike some of the conversations that we've got into. And this board has also been very attentive to the pleas from people of having traffic go through their neighborhood when we look at interconnectivity. And now we're talking about taking properties on both sides, which are single-family, and a couple of them very large lots, as Mr. Barker mentioned, and putting multifamily right in the middle of that. Also, our comp plan, and it was very careful when it was set up, to say, you know, these are densities and stuff that are up to and not guaranteed because of situations we're running into right now. And when you put this out on paper, maybe RM8 looked like that might be a good possibility in that area, but as properties grow and change and are developed at different densities, for instance, like these single-family neighborhoods, I think there's some obligation, at least on my part, to try and protect that single-family atmosphere and not put high-density units in the middle of a single-family neighborhood, and particularly that affronts a dirt road or a two-lane road.
I think to counter on that, Mr. Chairman, if I could, if we go across the street, and we all were here on that decision, if you take 16th Street, compare 16th Street to 26th Street, which we talked about the property that's next to Indian River Estates. You have a huge Catholic church out there now on a dirt road. You have Village Green, which is probably RM8, guys, RM10? I have no idea.
RMH8.
Yeah. So you have more, even a more inclusive zoning just across the street from this. Same example, same dirt road, 26th Street now is paved. So I think I can counter your comment, Mr. Wheeler, to the same thing as what we did on 26th Street. You have 1 unit to 1 acre out there.
But there's no single-family residential along that street. It's all either rental or mobile home.
Now, I think at the end of 26th and 82nd, isn't that 1 to 1? Didn't we have a subdivision out there?
You're way out west. I'm talking that general neighborhood from the canal up to 66 and that block in there.
Quasi-judicial hearing.
But yeah, I can't talk to anyone, so I've got to voice my opinion here.
Have we finished with the
talk to everyone.
process?
Well, we have a motion on the floor. Is there any further discussion on this motion? This is for RS6, single family, 6 units, which would yield, what, 3 units or so? 3 point?
Probably 3.5.
3.5.
And I still think you'd have that person, and I do feel for Mr. Barker, but you're going to have that one person that might have their house right up against his barn. It's going to be no different than 2 or 3 people are going to look at that barn. They're going to be, and I can see them coming in years comes, and you know, we're tired of seeing this guy shoveling manure, and this is just one house. But that's my comment.
No, they would probably be talking about the smell, not the site.
True.
But I would like to say that we've been selected by this community because of our judgment. And we do have a room here for judgment. And I think our judgment should be look to the future, not the past. And I think we do, as a commission, seem to do that pretty well together, although we're diverse. And I am interested in the difference in May and Shell and all this business, and I'm, as a former teacher, very well aware of the difference in May and Shell. But I do think it leaves judgment for us, and I think now is, and the future, good judgment should prevail.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. excuse me, Mr. Davis.
You know, I tell you, when you look at this and you do look at the densities that's adjacent to it, Commissioner Newberger brings I love your idea of the RM8, but not in this area. It's something that I think that we may be able to look at a later date, but that it would not fit, in my opinion, on this piece of property. And with that being the case, and in light of what Mr. Barker has said, with as far as when you look at everything that is on the southern half of this, in this general area, on the southern half of this, it's all single family residential. And I'm going to support Commissioner Wheeler's motion on this for RS6.
What'd you say?
That's what I said, yeah.
Good judgment.
Well, I think if not RM8, at least RM6 would be just right for this property.
Yeah.
It's close to Road 60. It's got a good north-south road adjoining, and I think it fits. And I think it is separated from the single family, at least to the west side. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. I assume you're ready to vote? We have a motion to deny the appeal and rezone it at RS6, if that's what the developer wants. All in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries 3-2. Moving right along. Is it time for a break? Might be a good time for a break. Let's take the break now and then instead of wait until 10:30. 5 minutes.
You're going to get me a new order.
Meeting back to order, please. We're still under item 9, which is public hearings. This will be 9A2, consideration of proposed proportionate, let me start over. Consideration of proposed proportionate fair share ordinance amendments to LDR Chapter 910, concurrency management system. Mr. Keating?
Yes, this is a proposed amendment to the county's land development regulations to adopt a proportionate fair share ordinance. And the proposal is to amend Chapter 910, which is the concurrency chapter of the LDRs. And the state currently requires all local governments to adopt a proportionate fair share ordinance, so we're complying with a state mandate to do this. The proportionate fair share issue has been discussed pretty extensively over the last few months, and as a matter of fact, we had a 3-hour workshop meeting on it on March 3rd that I think was very productive, and I think a lot of people learned a lot about proportionate fair share, and based on that workshop, we made a number of changes to the draft ordinance that we had. The bad news that I have for you today is I'm going to give the same presentation that I gave at the workshop and the same presentation that I gave at the Planning and Zoning Commission. So
Joe?
You already seen it?
So several of you may be able to give it better than me after. So I apologize to the audience.
You could put little pictures and stuff like Phil does.
I'll consult with Phil on my next PowerPoint.
Or behind-the-scene music.
I'm going to start with a little background. First of all, the state in 1985 first adopted the mandate that all local governments institute concurrency. We here in Indian River County instituted in 1990 when we adopted our comp plan pursuant to the 85 Growth Management Act. And then over the years, both the state and the county have made changes to the concurrency regulations. Then last year, the state passed Senate Bill 360, which makes even more changes. I think probably the first thing to do when considering proportionate fair share or concurrency in general is to look at the definition of concurrency. And the definition of concurrency in the statute is that it is the intent of the legislature that public facilities and services needed to support new development shall be available concurrent with the impacts of such development. And that was the concurrency rule that was established in 1985, and really the implementation has changed a little bit from the strict wording of the concurrency definition. I think you all know there are 6 facilities that concurrency applies to: transportation, water, sewer, drainage, solid waste, and parks. Also last year the legislature added schools to that list, and we are currently working on school concurrency. I think you all know that we are a pilot community for school concurrency, so we're actually pretty far along in crafting school concurrency rules. Of the 6 concurrency facilities we have right now, the one that's most problematic and the one that's a real challenge is transportation. But let me go into a little bit about Senate Bill 360 passed by the legislature last year and what it does. It does modify Chapter 163 of the statutes, which is the Local Government Comprehensive Planning Act. And Senate Bill 360 requires local governments to implement school concurrency, as I said, and it changes various concurrency requirements. It also mandates that local governments adopt proportionate fair share ordinances by December 1st of 2006. So by the end of this year, we'd have to do it. We're a little ahead of the curve because I was appointed to a state advisory committee that developed a model ordinance. So that's one of the reasons we're here today instead of on November 29th. The wording of Senate Bill 360 that relates to proportionate share is the intent of the legislature to provide a method by which the impacts of development on transportation facilities can be mitigated by the cooperative efforts of the public and private sectors. Essentially, that's the rationale for having proportionate fair share. And as I said, Senate Bill 360 requires each local government in the state to adopt a proportionate fair share ordinance by December 1st of this year. Let me tell you, generally the concept of proportionate share is that if a developer has a project out there that doesn't meet concurrency, that there's a deficient link, the project, the way our rules are now, the project can't go forward until the link is committed for improvement. Under proportionate fair share, an applicant can propose to pay his proportionate share of the cost of that improvement project. And then if the Board of County Commissioners approves a prop share agreement, the development can go forward and the project will be vested on all the links on the system. That's the overall concept of proportionate fair share. Let me tell you about the draft ordinance that's in your backup. The draft ordinance is consistent with Senate Bill 360. There are some provisions in Senate Bill 360 that are discretionary. They're not mandated by the state, and some of those discretionary provisions are not included in the draft ordinance. The draft ordinance is based on the model ordinance that DOT developed and made available to local governments. It's also, as I said, structured to be part of Chapter 910, which is the concurrency chapter of the land development regulations. Regarding the specific provisions of prop share applies only to development projects that have a deficient link. If someone has a development project and there's no concurrency problems, prop share doesn't come into play. It doesn't apply to DRIs, but DRIs can use prop share. There's essentially a separate rule for DRIs allowing prop share. And the provisions of our ordinance require an applicant to submit a prop share application to the county. Now, if someone is submitting a prop share application, there are some requirements related to the improvement project, the roadway improvement project. First of all, if an applicant proposes to enter into a prop share agreement with the county, the road that is proposed to be improved needs to mitigate or solve the development project's concurrency problem. The roadway improvement project must be in a financially feasible 5-year capital improvements program. Alternatively, if the roadway improvement project that needs to be done in order to provide the capacity that the developer needs, if that project isn't in the CIP right now, the board can commit to add that improvement project to the CIP in the next regular amendment cycle and enter into a prop share agreement. And actually, we've made a minor change to the ordinance whereby the board wouldn't just commit to adding the improvement project to the CIP. They would actually amend the CIP concurrent with approving the prop share agreement. And that's allowed because there are special rules regarding amending the capital improvements element of the comp plan. It essentially can be done anytime and not during the 2-year windows. So this gets you away from having to make a commitment in the future and allows you to amend the CIP immediately. The Senate Bill 360 actually establishes the formula for the prop share amount that someone has to pay, and this is the formula. Essentially, the amount is a ratio times the cost of the roadway improvement project. And the ratio is, the numerator is the number of trips that the development project is putting on the prop share road, and the denominator is the increase in the capacity of that roadway, which will be realized when the project is built. That produces a ratio. It's multiplied times the cost of the improvement project, and that's the proportionate fair share amount. And I am going to, in tedious detail, go through an example, so that might make this a little clearer. One of the other components of the draft ordinance is that when a prop share agreement is entered into and the prop share contribution made, the development project trips will be vested on the entire system, and it will be vested consistent with the county's CCI 5 concurrency certificate, which gives 5-year vesting. Now, an important part of Senate Bill 360 relates to impact fee credit. Senate Bill 360 says proportionate fair share mitigation shall be applied as a credit against impact fees to the extent that all or a portion of the proportionate fair share mitigation is used to address the same capital infrastructure improvements contemplated by the local government's impact fee ordinance. We have taken that and...
Go back to that and let me read that.
Go ahead, read it.
Oh, I am.
Read it out loud.
Please. Is this a test? Okay. Proportionate share mitigation shall be applied as a credit against impact fees to the extent that all or a portion of the proportionate fair share mitigation is used to address the same capital infrastructure improvement contemplated by the local government's impact fee. All right, somebody else read it now.
Well, do we all have to read it before you understand it?
I need just a minute to let this sink in.
It's a run-on sentence.
Yeah.
Okay, that really wasn't why I wanted to read it twice. Sorry about that.
Let me tell you, we have developed a formula that we feel actually implements this. And let me tell you the concept behind the formula that we developed. First of all, we have a consumption-based impact fee system here, which means for every lane mile of road that you use, you pay an amount that is consistent with building that portion of a lane mile. To give you an idea, a single-family house uses up about 0.0012 lane miles of road. So for every 1,000 new houses, say, you need a lane mile of road. But that doesn't mean a specific lane mile. Actually, that lane mile is parts of lane miles on many roads. So what we did was try to craft a formula, and this is not in the model ordinance or anywhere else. This is something we came up with. We tried to craft an ordinance that actually identifies how much of a development project's impact fees would be applied to the proportionate fair share roadway. And this is that formula. The formula is, and it uses a term here that you may not be familiar with, and that's a VMT. And VMT is vehicle miles of travel. So if a development project has one trip on one link, and the link is a mile long, that's one VMT, one vehicle mile of travel. So the way we structured this formula is we're taking the project's VMT, vehicle miles of travel, on the proportionate fair share link as the numerator, again coming up with a ratio, and the denominator is the project's total vehicle miles of travel. So again, what we're trying to determine is essentially what portion of the project's total road usage is on the proportionate share roadway, because that is the ratio, the percentage of the impact fees that really should be earmarked for that roadway to replace the lane miles being used.
Can I ask one question? Is this Bob's personal formula? Has this ever been used before?
No. Well, I don't know that it's used any other place, but it has been an effort among several of us, among my staff, Stan and Sasan, among Chris Mora, Jim Davis, Jason Brown, Joe Baird. We all buy into this.
Can I ask, Mr. Chairman, and Ms. Bum?
I am going to have an example that might make it.
But before we just get too far, though, so a developer will get impact fee credits against the impact fees that are going to be paid on a development as they're built when they pull a building permit, to the extent I'm lost. I understand that there's going to be X number of dollars on impact fees that are going to be paid on a development at some point. Here, it could be early. The long and short of it is when is really irrelevant right now, but it's going to be paid. If they need to use the proportionate share agreement, all of those impact fees can be credited to help to pay for this weak link that is either in or to be added in our capital improvements element. If it's more than that, then they may pay more, or the county may strike a check to help facilitate making that improvement.
Can we read that one more time?
I think why don't we go through the examples? I think the examples will give you an idea. I think if you let us get to the examples, they might answer a lot of the questions.
And actually, let me go to the other formula that's on this page. I went through the credit formula, but if you look at what someone's going to have to pay if he does an agreement, that's down here where it says what the applicant pays. And basically, he's going to pay all of his impact fees, all of his prop share payment, and then he'll get a credit for the portion of his impact fees that would be used or should be earmarked for that road. And in the example, we'll show you what that kind of looks like in dollars and cents. But basically, bottom line is someone's going to be paying a premium to use prop share.
After he pays all those fees in cash, I assume.
Yes.
And he's going to get a credit. What does the credit look like? A rebate on what he had paid?
Oh, no. He's going to pay all of his impact fees, then he's going to pay his prop share amount, and then he will get a credit. That amount will be reduced by the credit.
Will be reduced. Okay.
Yes.
And this roadway has to be in the 5-year plan?
It's got to be an efficient link, number one.
Well, got that.
And if it's not in the 5-year plan, we can bring it forward.
But the MPO approves the 5-year plan.
They approve a 5-year plan and you approve a 5-year plan.
So we're talking so what 5-year plan are we talking?
One that you will be seeing on May 2nd. Actually, we have it in place, but what we're doing, we're bringing comp plan amendments, the January round of comp plan amendments to you on May 2nd. And one of those amendments is an amendment to the capital improvements element. By the way, we're also a pilot community with the state for the capital improvements element. And the capital improvements element has a capital improvement program, which identifies in the next 5 years every capital improvement that the county is going to make. And actually, it's over $600 million for total capital improvements and $311 million just for transportation capital improvements in the next 5 years. And this is a balanced capital improvements program. There is adequate revenue to fund all those expenditures.
When you say the total impact fees, you are talking about just one area of concurrency. If this could also work for schools, this is also the same formula could work for water and sewer.
Actually, there isn't, prop share is not applied to any of the other 5 concurrency facilities currently in place. Just transportation, but there is a requirement that when school concurrency is put in place, that there be prop share.
That would be a different workshop, okay.
And we are currently working on that, too. Just to go over some of the procedures regarding the fair share agreement. First, the applicant files an application, staff reviews the application and drafts an agreement, and the county attorney's office is already got a draft agreement that we're working on right now. Next step is the Board of County Commissioners approves the agreement. Then the applicant pays his prop share amount and the balance of the impact fees, and then the applicant will get vested. Now, let me go through the example. Again, we're talking prop share estates, which is the project. 500 dwelling units, single-family detached dwelling units. Those types of dwelling units produce about 1 peak hour trip per unit. So we got 500 peak hour trips. We just made some assumptions about how many trips impacting links, and in this case, we assumed that there's 100 peak hour trips impacting, and we picked out a real link here, US 1 from Old Dixie to 41st Street. It is one that is on the concurrency radar screen that we are going to have to look at, and we assume 70 non-peak direction trips impacting US 1. Given those number of units, the total traffic impact fee for this project would be $2,919,000. So what we're looking at, we're making the assumption that this segment of US 1 will be a deficient link with the project. And to make it pretty easy to deal with, we're saying the capacity and demand right now are the same, so there are no available trips. The length of the segment is half a mile. The improvement project that needs to be done to get the additional capacity is adding 2 lanes. After the improvement project, we're going to have a capacity of 2,790. That compares to the 1,860 right now. So it'll be an increase of 930 peak hour trips. We assume that the project's going to cost $3 million.
Bob, is US 1, is that on our 5-year plan right now?
No, it's not.
Then, because there's some people might look at that example and think they can get a proportionate share agreement on it. That's the only point I have.
And actually, that's what I come up to with this slide. So we would be saying the developer would come in here and he would propose that this segment of US 1 be added to the 5-year CIP, realizing that that a project needs to be in a financially feasible 5-year CIP. Anyone proposing a project to be added is going to have to demonstrate how it will be financially feasible. Where's the revenue going to come from? So again, we're just making assumptions. We assume that the applicant's going to come in and request that the board recognize that some other development projects are in the work and that they're going to propose prop share agreements, and that will constitute about 60% of the cost. And he's recommending that the county allocate 40% of the roadway improvement project costs from another source. Again, we're making some assumptions, but this is a viable scenario that could come forward.
Could I inject and just ask one question right here, please? The 5-year road plan, if the commission approves that, does that bump another project? We only have so much we can do in a 5-year period, unless we're going to add a lot of staff or whatever. How do you rank that?
That's going to have to be one of your consideration. I think you'll have to ask the Public Works Capital Project staff whether they can do it. So that's a good point.
Without impacting anybody else. Because
Correct.
you've already made commitments or whatever previously. Correct. So how does that work?
Correct. We're assuming that there wouldn't be any impact on any other project in there. And that might mean that the applicant has to come up with 100% of the funding.
And manpower. I mean, staff power.
Or that's another alternative. The applicant could actually do the project.
I would almost like that to be the preferred method. Instead of having a pay-as-you-go, cash in our bank does not put asphalt immediately on our roads.
Because anybody can buy their way in.
And that's right. I don't want somebody to strike a check and make our roads worse. I want a development to have to put the infrastructure in that we need. And so instead of a pay-as-you-go, I do understand that we're going to have that situation where clearly the pay-as-you-go is going to be appropriate. But I would almost rather have a build-as-you-go.
And what Wesley's saying and Sandra's saying, I agree, you know, we do that to some degree, I think more so with sidewalks than we do roads. We do that definitely with water and sewer and utilities. You don't have it in the ground, you don't build. And I think that the point's well taken, that somehow we need to put this infrastructure in when it's being built rather than planning it out 5 years, and even if we're doing a piecemeal and adding on and building roads in sections.
And you definitely have that option if the project's not in the 5-year CIP. If the project's in the 5-year CIP, state law says the board has to approve a prop share agreement if someone comes in and meets all the rules. If it's not in the 5-year CIP, you have the discretion of putting the developers on notice that they have to get together with other developers and plan to construct the project, not just make a payment.
I have a question to that too, Mr. Chairman. And Bob, take Oslo Road. If all those developments came in out there at Oslo Road and said, hey, we're gonna 5-lane Oslo Road. We know it's in your plan, but we want to do these developments. We want to go ahead and 5-lane Oslo Road. Is that feasible? Is that possible? I mean, I hear what, believe it or not, I hear what Commissioner Wheeler says, and I agree with Commissioner Davis. I think it's one of those situations that, you know, truly we have reached that point where roads are a problem. And we've been sitting up here for 2 years going, we're hearing from staff that we're doing them. We haven't seen one road sign up yet. We continue to see development take place. And I would rather put the burden on the back of the developer, let them do it because they know how to get it done, and that doesn't become a problem.
Well, let me say that we've, if you've seen in just about on every agenda, we are moving forward very quickly with roads. We've just received the bids for the phase of 512. We've got 41st under. We've got the new thing. And we're working, we'll be having Oslo, we're going to be clearing that area and bidding the 5-laning of Oslo very quickly. So I think the main difference, people get confused. Right-of-way is a major problem for roads where it isn't for utilities. You only need 2 feet to run or 4 feet to run a water or sewer line. And so you don't affect people's property as much. And what you're going to see, we are being aggressive. The key to moving our roads is getting the right-of-way, which, whether anyone likes, this stuff was platted back in the 50s, and we're left with the burden of straightening it out. And you will see us, and it won't be easy trying to get right-of-way from a lot of people, substantial right-of-way to make these road improvements.
I think the point, and the point's well taken, Joe, but if you look at Oslo Road and the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 developments that already have rooftops, we still have an inferior road. And I think my point, as the other 3 commissioners have made, if the road would have been built as they're building their rooftops, then the problem tends to go away. And I don't know if that's an easier or smoother transition in doing that, as opposed to sitting here going, you know, we're trying to work a formula, we're trying to give a credit, we're trying, you know, just do it.
Yeah. And I agree, because I think if we set the standard that we're going to do it,
sure,
then it will be done.
I agree.
Well, I think the mechanism for that's a developer's agreement. Prior to a couple of years ago, the attorney's office didn't think we could do them for roads. Now they agree. But this is another tool. We can do developers' agreements and make them do it when they're putting in their subdivision. That's another tool. But now we've got prop share, which we have to, because it's a new state law. So that's a separate issue. But they could do both. You can do a prop share agreement and the developers' agreement separate to get the road done.
Absolutely. And US 1's a classic example. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that if as bad as we wanted to, we could not as a county solve that today.
No.
And so, I mean, this gives us some sort of mechanism of relief. And so I agree, we need to be able to have that, but I just want to make it perfectly clear.
I think if we have this in there, that's fine and dandy, but if we as a Board of County Commissioners say, okay, if this development's going in, this road needs to be fixed, you do the road. Yeah. Then here we go.
We'll look ahead and see what the rest of your project looks like.
And I don't mind the county. I mean, you know, the development may not be responsible for all of the road. I'd rather, you know, work with the developer to get the road built and let them do it, and us give them a check for the part that's outside their realm of responsibility.
We're doing that with DeVos on 53rd as we speak. DeVos is putting in 4 lanes and a median. Right. As we speak, we've done that with developers. So we're using developers' agreements now.
Also.
Landscape medians, Joe?
Okay, can we get back to this fair share ordinance?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Sorry about that.
Good plan, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Let me walk through the example and things may be a little clearer. If you remember from the slide that had all the numbers on it, this theoretical project was putting 100 peak-hour, peak direction trips on the impacted roadway. So that's what you see here. 100 is the project's demand. 930 is the service volume increase. It was the difference between, I think, 1860 and 2790. So the developer essentially is using 10.75% of the new capacity that's going to be created when the additional 2 lanes is put in. That 2 lanes is going to cost $3 million, 10.75% of that is $322,581. That's the developer's prop share contribution. That's what he's going to have to make up front before we modify it.
Question, if I may.
You may.
Is there some way to crank in, for instance, with this proportionate share, they kick in the $322,000, we may not build that for 5 years.
Correct.
Is there some way to add in an inflation?
Yes, we have that in the ordinance, and I didn't go into that and didn't want to complicate it more, but that $3 million that you have there reflects an inflated cost to the time that the road is anticipated to be built. If it's
dollars.
It takes today's dollars and inflates them. Yes.
But I would rather, if there's a way, and I don't know if there's a way, but what I hear Commissioner Wheeler say is charge them at today's rate.
Yep.
And then know when we build that 5 years from now that you're going to pay the difference. Right now, we're assuming 5 years from now what that's going to be, what that price is going to be. And we've got some very intelligent staff, don't get me wrong, but nobody could have envisioned what we just went through with the cost of building materials, asphalt, and everything else. And I'd rather be realistic, if we can, with actual figures than trying to plan what a road's going to be 5 years down the road.
Even on an annual, and I don't know, but it would be complicated, even on an annual
We're
basis, kicking in the additional.
I think Jason can speak to the rate we're using to, we have to have an imputed rate to try and decide on what we think. We know that construction costs are far exceeding, if you looked at the COLA or the price index, it's far exceeding that. We know that. So I think we used, I think it was 7.5 or 7.75% as a, in the formula, isn't it, Jason?
What we're using right now is 7.75% per year.
Do you factor in a national disaster?
What are you using?
Which we've had?
You can't.
7.75% per year.
Well,
annual increase.
Unfortunately, we could readdress this down the road. You have to have a defensible formula, which has got defense. We're using 7.75, which is prime. We thought that was a good idea. You have to have a defensible formula. If we can come back and readjust the costs, but we do have to have, and that is a risk when you do budgets or forecasting or try and do this. You have to, your assumptions, and where, if you start to go astray, what assumptions you use were incorrect. But come up with a formula, we have to have assumptions.
I think the key too, though, Joe and Bob, we're getting back on the fact that we're talking about a deficient link. As you're going to talk about proportionate share, if that link is deficient, developer steps up and pays for that, then we don't have to worry about inflation. It's on his back. He's going to pay for it, whether it's now or later.
No, he's vested, and then it's got to be put in, and that's all he pays, is the way I interpret this proportionate share to be.
But he pays that future dollars on today's
That's proportionate share. I'm saying if we put in that developer's agreement.
This is just to figure out the credit he gets. You have to remember.
Right.
This is
right.
just
That's
to figure out the credit he
pay as
gets.
you go.
one
Right.
at a time.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Okay. Jason, do you have something?
Unless you have
He
questions.
took care of it. Okay, Bob?
Okay, so we got to the prop share payment, and as we just acknowledged, that $3 million is a lot more than it would cost us to build it right now. We have inflated that up to future years, whether it's 2 years out, 3 years out, whatever. So that's the prop share amount. If we look at the next component, the credit, let me walk you through that. We've got 85, which is the 85 is reflected by, if you remember the earlier slide, we had 100 project peak hour, peak direction trips on the roadway, and we had 70 peak hour non-direction trips. So if you take the 170 both, you will come down to 85 peak hour trips on that link. So that is the project's total vehicle miles of travel on that link. And then the denominator is 1,500. If you remember, there are 500 units, 500 peak hour trips. And we assumed an average trip length of 6 miles, and we compensated for the fact that each trip has 2 trip ends, so we divided that in half. Basically, we took the 500 and multiplied it by 6 to come up with 3,000, and then divided it by half so that we're allocating the trips partly to the production and partly to the attraction. So basically, we end up with a ratio of 5.67. What that is saying is, based on our VMT theory, that of all the impact fees that he's paying, and we were applying the theory of a consumption-based impact fee, then 5.67 of his impact fees should be used on that roadway, and that's the amount he can get a credit for. So we take the 5.67 and multiply that times his impact fee liability of $2,919,000, and we get a credit of $165,507. Okay? So then the prop share payment, and actually what we do to get the prop share payment is we take the gross payment, the $322,581, subtract the credit from it, which is $165,507, and we get $157,074. That's the premium that he's paying to do prop share, because the final total dollar amount that he's going to have to pay is his total traffic impact fee, the $2,919,000, plus his net prop share payment of $157,074. So instead of paying $2.919 million in impact fees, he's paying a total impact fee plus proportionate share payment of $3,076,074.
Okay, question.
Yes.
Okay. Say this is in the 5-year work plan. We don't have to address that. But it's year 5, and he wants it year 1.
Actually,
So how do you
Do a developer's agreement.
Actually, this is a pay-and-go system. So even if we're not going to build the road until year 5, when he makes his payment, he can get his building permits.
So it really is buy-in, just who has the biggest dollars, and the big dog can do this.
Well, we can bring this forward with an agreement that he has to build the road to get this.
If it's not on the 5-year.
If it's not on the 5-year like this one. If it's a US 1, the nice thing about this, if it's a US 1 and it's not on the 5-year, we can do this and then make him build it on a developer's agreement.
You know, to put that in perspective, I was just curious looking at this. Put that in perspective, though, that adds on 500 lots about $6,152 to the cost of that lot, which isn't a lot of money when people are paying anywhere from $70,000 to $1 million, $70,000 on up for, property costs. So, when you spread that over, the $3 million, when you look at a developer having come with $3 million, seems like a lot of money. But when you divide that among the lots, it's not as bad as it appears.
Basically, this is just our best example of being able to have growth pay its own way.
Yes.
I'm sorry it costs more. It's not my intent to raise the cost of lots in this community, but I think it's incumbent upon this board to try to have growth pay its own way and not put that on the backs of the existing taxpayers that are already here.
Well said.
Thank you. You have more, Bob?
I know it.
Can we let Bob finish?
Actually, I am just about finished. We do have a recommendation. I have one recommended change to tell you. We do have a proposed change on page 11 of the ordinance, which is page 225 in your backup. And basically, it's a pretty minor change. It's the last sentence of paragraph 8B that starts out, the effective date shall be specified in the agreement. We'd like to change it to read, the effective date shall be specified in the agreement and shall be the date the agreement is approved by the board or its designee. And that's wording that we discussed with the attorney's office. And I don't know if, Will, you want to go into the concept of a designee?
And what board are we talking about?
The county commission.
It shall be may?
Yeah, the way it reads right now is the effective date of the agreement could be within a year of the board approval. And we didn't want to leave that out there, especially if there was a capital improvement element amendment associated with this. We wanted to tie it down at the time the amendment was approved and the developer's agreement was approved, so that the implementing agreement will have them paying their fair share, or at least escrowing it prior to the agreement coming to the board, and when the board approves it, the funds are available and they are committed to their fair share, any improvements that we might want them to meet at that time. We thought leaving it open for a year for them to have an effective date a year out just wasn't good business for us. And the idea of the designee, there may be some of these prop share agreements will not require a capital improvement element amendment because they're already on a 5-year plan. And if that's the case, our intent is to come to you with a standard prop share agreement and have you authorize either the administrator or his assistant to sign them. A resolution would say that the administrator would be authorized to execute prop share agreements substantially in the following format, and all it would change is the name of the developer, the roads being improved, the amount of the payment. And if it did require a capital improvement plan amendment, then it would come to you and we'd have it signed by the board. At the same time, the change was made to the capital improvement element to add a link. We'd bring the prop share agreement along with it and any developer's agreement at the same time.
Does it at any time go through P&Z? That's what I was talking about.
What would go to P&Z is not the prop share agreement. It's only the amendment to the capital improvement element would have to have a hearing before P&Z to get a recommendation and then come to you. Well, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think
that's a good question.
Actually, it would not. It would not. It would come to. There'd simply be an adoption hearing. As a matter of course, we have always looked for P&Z's recommendation on any comp plan amendment, but this could come directly to you. It only requires one adoption hearing.
Okay.
No,
would you have to have just a majority vote, or?
Yes.
This is a major thing, and I think all this needs to be thought out. Not that it hasn't been. You have overthought of some of this, but.
Well, I think you've heard four votes up here already as to what we would like to add to that. That's
no, we haven't. We haven't even thought about this.
Well, not this we haven't.
Okay, Bob, are you through? That's it. Any other questions of Bob before I open the public hearing? Okay, I'm going to open the public hearing. This is a consideration of proposed proportionate fair share ordinance. No one?
Mr. Barber?
Yes, Mr. Barber.
Guy Barber, it's 2050 Highlands Road, Highlands Drive, Southwest. I want to put a little thing in perspective here when you're talking about this. First of all these impact fees and everything you're talking about, we're paying it. The developer's not paying it. We're paying it. Every bit of it. In the year 2001, the assessed property value in Indian River County was $7 billion. In the year 2005, the assessed property value in Indian River County was $14 billion. In the years 2004 to 2005, in the middle of a devastating hurricane season, you increased the value of the property 17%. We did the traditional thing when people are down. We kicked them right in the head. All right, so now we're getting to this point here. For years, we have come down to this podium, to other boards and everything else, and said, your infrastructure is not keeping up with your growth. And we're not planning for the growth. We're talking about traffic impact for these places, but you're not talking one thing about public transportation. There's nothing in here about increasing public transportation that I hear. That could reduce your traffic impact, because the more impact you impose on these people, the higher it is for us to live. The house that I did rent for $600 now costs $1,000 a month to rent. Now here's the kicker right here. What happens if this trend reverses itself? And this housing market is starting to slow down. What happens if this reverses itself? What happens if the assessments start going the other way? Because there's no way you can take some of these houses that we have and that were valued as $75,000 or $80,000 or up to $150,000 now. That can't keep going up. Somebody has to get, sooner or later, going to realize that the value of these properties are going to have to go back down because they're just not moving the way they should. Concurrency. When it comes to the school district, there is only one way that a school district can come into compliance or concurrency with the plan, and that is not building elitist schools in gated neighborhoods. That is building small neighborhood schools, grades K through 8, in targeted neighborhoods where the kids are. Several years ago, Mr. Hetty and I did a report on the schools, on where the people were. We have a dot matrix map. And on that map, it has a little red dot for every school child in the district. And where they're building schools was no red dots, or very few. And what we're doing right now with schools is putting them where the kids aren't. And we're turning around and we're letting parents drive their kids to these schools, and I'm talking about magnet schools. Now, we don't have enough buses.
Mr. Barber?
Yes.
We're talking about an ordinance here. I don't think it has much to do with what you're discussing, but where the schools are going.
Well, we're paying for it. And what I'm wondering is, why are we continue to go down this road of figuring how we can get more money and more impact fees when we're not figuring how to cut the cost to everybody down? All you're doing is increasing my cost, and you're not coming up with any plan to decrease the cost or to push it around for everybody else.
Go ahead.
May I comment?
You may.
Yeah, because a lot of things you say sound really good, but when you put them in perspective, I think there's a big difference between the picture you're painting and the actual picture. When you talk about we're paying for it, and what these fees are doing is actually taking the taxpayer and reducing the burden off the taxpayer by having the developer pay, and the developer's paying and passing that cost on to the people that are buying new homes. One of the reasons your rent has gone up so much is because I think in 1994, under a constitutional amendment, the people in this state voted to have Save Our Homes, which limited the assessed value of your house to 3% or less a year, which means that the average person is being subsidized by non-homesteaded property, of which rental is part of, and their taxes are going up disproportionately because of that. The other thing you mentioned was the increase in billions of dollars, and that's because of the tremendous development we've had and inflation that's created the increase. It just we haven't doubled property values in the last several years from $7 billion to $14 billion just because they're sitting here. These values have come on as new development and new construction, which increases the value. public transportation we addressed at the MPO, and we have a public transportation system which is working fairly well for the size community we are through the Council on Aging, which we in the government subsidize, and we constantly look at those routes and try to figure out better times and places and how we can better serve with the public transportation. And those are just a few of the notes I made and some of the things you said. But Homestead is where a lot of the, with the Homestead and Save Our Homes, rental properties and anything else, their prices are going to increase because rental property, non-homesteaded property are actually subsidizing homesteaded property and taxes.
I understand. I understand that logic that you use with me, but I also understand that the value of the property that you have increased. It doesn't make any difference if you're only allowed to take 3%. A couple of years ago, you got 3% of 100,000. Now you're getting 3% of 180,000. You understand what I'm talking about? You're increasing the value of people's property. And if you only get 3%, so what? You're saying you can only increase the value of the property 3%?
It's all new construction that's increased the tax base, not the property that's been here that's homesteaded. That's had very little effect on the.
But you're not taking anything off the taxpayer because now these homes going up for $350,000, $400,000.
But if we weren't doing what we've been talking about here in these fees, the taxpayer would be paying a whole lot more annually in property taxes to pay for these improvements rather than the impact fees, paying for it when somebody comes in and develops the property. So this is actually helping keeping the taxpayer bite less.
So if a taxpayer goes and buys one of these new houses with the higher impact fees on it, where does he get the relief? How are you going to sell these homes? I mean, the person that buys these homes are the ones that pays the impact fees and the taxes.
Well, you know, the only point I'm making is that this helps the taxpayers, doesn't hurt the taxpayer. All the other stuff we can get into a long, lengthy debate about, but this actually takes the burden off the taxpayers by having the developer pay these fees.
Now, I would certainly like to know if there's any meetings that are going to be held to this proportionate share. If you're not going to correct the problems that cause the problems, if you're not going to address the transportation problem by merely saying we're going to build more roads and bigger roads, that's not addressing the problem. If you're talking about the schools or anything else like that to allow to continue going on the way it's going on, that's not addressing the problem. All you're doing is right now is you're saying we have a problem and we're going to tax it and assess it. And that seems to be your only solution to get out of the problem that you're in.
Well, my only rebuttal would be I disagree. I'm leaving it.
I understand. I understand. Probably this is not the time to get into discussion, but the whole fact of the matter remains is, as long as you keep taxing and putting impact fees on problems instead of fixing them, what's going to cost us more and more and more, and the value of that property right now might be sky high, but the situation, the tide is turning and the situation is reversing, and you're going to buy property now and you're going to pay impact fees and everything else, the next thing you know, when you try to unload it, it isn't going to be worth anything. And then the improvements to that infrastructure 10 years from now, when you say you have to repave that road or relay that sewer line or something comes up, you're not going to have the funds for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barber. Anyone care to talk about the ordinance?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Commissioners? Basically, I've read Senate Bill 360 several times, and I've read staff's summary, and I support both. I think it's a good thing, and I think that, like I've said in the past, it's really going to affect our county, probably less than any other county in the state of Florida, because we've already done our job and have adopted a concurrency plan that we've been working on for quite some time. It's probably going to affect a lot of other people in the state much, much more than it is us. And then through studying some other counties and what they're going to do and how they're planning on adopting it, I can personally tell you that I think that staff has taken a rather conservative approach to adopting this. So I think if there's any areas that you have a gray area in that you're a little worried about, I wouldn't worry about it, in my personal opinion. I think they've done a real good job not just letting builders pay and go and not getting the roads done. I think they've put as many provisions in there as they possibly could. So I'm in full support of this, and I'm really in support of what staff did to it, to summarize it and adopt it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to be heard on this subject? Yes.
Bob Johnson, Coral Wind Subdivision. It seems like there needs to be some definitions, and I have, is there a definition of what a credit is and what they are? Is there a definition of what a credit consists of? Is this say a new school, or how do we determine what a credit is for the
Actually, a credit is $1. It's
right.
dollar amount.
So what is the credit based on, though? I mean, in other words, do you, in your negotiation with the determine in the staff that what a credit is, or how is that determined?
It's based on the formula. The credit's based on the formula that we've got in front of you today. It's a dollar.
I understand the formula, but what is the credit? In other words, is a school?
This is only roads. This only deals with roads.
How would we determine that the developer is to get a credit to begin with? That, I guess.
Well, we went through the formula a little while ago, what he's charged and what his credit.
Not how it's accomplished, but how we determine what a credit is. As the taxpayer, we don't know what year, for instance, the formula is based on. Is it? It's going to be based on some future year formula. Is there some kind of concrete? In other words, you say you made up, Bob, this formula. It's never been tested. How do we know, as say taxpayers, that we're not going down the black hole versus or a deficit using this formula, I guess?
Staff worked on this formula. We took extensive time to review it to make sure it was on the conservative side to protect the resident and the taxpayer. Most of our roads, we have never used ad valorem taxes to build new roads in this community. And that's one of the reasons our ad valorem tax rate is so low in the general fund and the MSTU. We've always used optional sales tax, impact fees, and the optional gas tax. So when you talk about roads, we've never used ad valorem taxes for any of our infrastructure, major infrastructure. We tried to stay away from that so that new construction is paying for itself, not the current resident.
Thank you.
I'm not concerned that how do we determine, like recently, Mark Brackett worked out a developer's agreement for a road. Now, I understand he gets credit for coming up with this 4 lanes between 16th Street Southwest and 5th Street Southwest. How did we determine that this was he would get a credit for this? And I assume that probably he would fall under this proportionate formula that we're getting ready to ordinance. He may not now, but when it's passed, this would be a good example of how this would work.
Bob, you care to respond to that?
Yeah, it gets a little complicated because we have the pending ordinance that's in place right now, but generally, Mark Brackett, if the pending ordinance wasn't in place, Mark's project wouldn't need to use proportionate share because he was actually proposing to construct the project. So we need to really look at this separate from prop share. He was actually going to construct an extra 2 lanes of a road to create additional capacity, create a lot more capacity than he needed, and he was actually going to get impact fee credits for essentially the county to buy back some of the additional capacity that Mark was creating.
So will you continue to do that in addition to this, or will everything fall under one umbrella now?
I think what we've got is prop share definitely has to be used when a roadway project is in the 5-year capital improvements program. because the county is committed to build it, and state law says that a developer has the right to use prop share. Now, when we have a road that's not in the capital improvements program, I think y'all have indicated that it's your preference that the developer go out there and build it. And we do have regulations that do accommodate that.
So I guess everything that's in the CIP is considered a credit then for the developer when it comes to transportation. Is that an accurate statement?
No. If a roadway is in the 5-year CIP, then and a developer has, and that's a deficient link, then the developer can come in and do a prop share agreement.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Ms. Stanbridge, you have your hand up.
Hi, I'm Ruth Stanbridge. I live at 4835 66th Avenue, and I don't envy your job at all. My question to you is this prop share, and it has plugged into it also inflation. And Mr. Baird alluded to the fact that right-of-way is a major, major issue, and especially even on the example that Bob gave, you have right-of-ways where you'll be putting extra 2 lanes, which you may be wiping out whole families, houses, and large pieces of property. Is there a way that this prop share that this developer is going to be going into would also pay for that right-of-way, which would be sometimes more expensive than the actual construction cost? How
probably rolled into it, all the construction costs, including
Yes.
right-of-way.
Yes, the cost includes all phases of the project.
not just the construction of the pavement on the ground, it's also the right-of-way.
Yes.
And so if you go into condemnation and all of those good things, attorney's fees and everything would roll back into this developer paying for all that.
Yes.
And they're aware, too, that this could be very pricey as they build this 500-unit development and pass this on to the new people.
Yeah, and in our CIP, you will see, when you see that on May 2nd, that we have tried to actually estimate the total costs of these projects. And that some of the projects are pretty costly because of those items, because of right-of-way acquisition and the various components of that.
Do you think that that will lessen this growth that is coming on us just from the price tags?
No, I don't see how it would.
I don't want to hazard a guess to that, but we are currently in the process of drafting up a scope of services to go out to update our impact fees. The school board had asked that we do it within the next year, and the costs have increased for all the other components too. So we're looking at a impact fee wide scope of services. So just for this reason, because costs have gone up significantly.
And so, in essence, then growth will replace the older neighborhoods simply with money. I mean, that's what we're anticipating happening in the future. We won't have neighborhoods anymore. We'll have 4 lanes and things of that sort. So I know those you can't put a price.
We will definitely affect some people. I don't think we'll affect all neighborhoods. You're one that is affected on 66.
Well, and 41st is that was the example he used, and in some cases that's in poor neighborhoods. So, I'm not talking just about my neighborhood, Joe. I'm talking about a general feeling throughout the county that we could all be replaced, and I guess it's just the bottom line. Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
Good. Anyone else wish to be heard on this item? All right, I'll close the public. Oops.
No.
Mr. Swift? You aren't Swift?
Not that Swift today, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. My name is Bob Swift. I live in the 6400 block of Glendale. I apologize. I got to pick up some allergies over the weekend between Bob's formulas. I've got a raging headache, so I'm going to be real quick. What this does for you, in summary, it doesn't require the board to approve any project, doesn't require the board to assume any additional road building. What it does, it gives you one more tool in the toolbox. As Joe said, we used to rely on sales tax and gas tax fees, and then about 15 years ago, 20 years ago, we started using impact fees. We've recently started to be allowed to use developer agreements, and now we've got the proportionate share opportunity, which is just one more toolbox that you have available and staff has available to solve problems and to put the infrastructure in place as growth occurs. One of the issues we all know about is that the length of time it takes to plan, acquire right of way, and build a road. So to say that we want to have that in advance of development, when you talk about the time period that it takes to put all that in place, it's virtually impossible. And if we wait and collect the impact fees after the road is built, we're always going to be behind the curve. So what this does, in addition, is that allows you to collect those impact fees in advance of the development project coming in. In the case of a large project, it might be a 7 to 10 year build-out. You're getting all those impact fees day one. So keep that in mind when you begin thinking about the cost to go up over a period of time and whether or not the rooftops are coming in line with the need for the road. If it takes a project 10 years to build out, it takes 5 years to build the road, and you very likely are ahead of the curve by the time that last rooftop comes in. It may not always be the case, but certainly in some situations that would happen. I would encourage you to adopt it. I think as we begin living with it, we may have other issues and want to refine some of the methodology, but we've got to get started on this process of addressing the problem. What I would also ask you to do to resolve another problem is, with the adoption of the Fair Share Ordinance, amend the pending ordinance so that projects that do not have a concurrency problem, because this applies only to projects that have a problem. So what you're doing is saying, okay, we're going to let a project that has a problem move ahead, but a project that doesn't have a problem still can't do anything. So if you would amend simultaneously with the adoption of the proportionate share your pending ordinance to allow a project that has no concurrency issues to move ahead and vest its rights at the time, not until, but at the time of site plan approval, final site plan approval, or PD approval, then you really solve the whole basket of issues. You're still allowing the small builder developer to move ahead because he can pay his impact fees as he pulls building permits if he prefers. He can pay into a proportionate share agreement, which in many cases is going to be a very minor portion of a road project. Remember too that when you look at the roads that are impacted by a project, you might have 30 links, Bob. So the proportion of traffic on a given link might be 2%, might be 1%, might be, in some of mine, or 0.5%. So it takes all the projects coming together before you start having enough money to fix that one link. So it's not like building a sidewalk parallel to your project, Mr. Wheeler. I have road links that are 5 miles away, which I'll be contributing through impact fees to fix, in addition to whatever I'm doing adjacent to the property. So this allows you to apply a broad base, apply that money to a broad area of a project as it impacts its roads, allows you to collect the money in advance, have the funds available when you need to build the road, and if you'll make that minor adjustment in the pending ordinance to allow someone to vest in at the time of site plan and building or PD approval, if it's a PD, then you've really solved all the issues, and you're guaranteed that you're going to have the most amount of money available up front of the development. So I would encourage you to both adopt the proportionate share and consider that amendment to your pending ordinance.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to comment on that. Just real briefly.
Okay.
There's really a staff that I'd like to
go ahead.
To it.
Are we in a public hearing?
Bob, wouldn't this make it so that we would not need this would basically... Bob Keating, this is basically to make it so that our pending ordinance that had to deal with the time of vesting impact fees would not be an issue, and people would really go back to vesting their impact fees at the time they build a building permit, which is the absolute latest that they would have to.
Actually, the pending ordinance is still an issue for those projects that don't have a deficient link. because they can't vest up front. And actually, we're after prop share, we're going to have two classes of development projects. The kind that have a deficient link and can pay a prop share and get vested, and then the ones that don't have a deficient link and can't get vested up front.
You'll have a third group, one that don't today, but after somebody vests, then they will. Okay.
Yes, sir. One more.
Good morning. My name is Brian Seymour at the law firm of Gunstreet Oakley. And I think we just got to exactly what my concern was, Commissioner Davis. What you're doing by the adoption of the proportionate fair share and keeping the pending ordinance as it is telling somebody, we like you better. You're in a better position if you don't meet concurrency. And I guess what, I would have the pending ordinance go away all entirely, but I guess what Bob said makes a lot of sense. Bob Swift, too many Bobs, I guess, is to make it fair, equitable, so that everybody's treated the same, which is simply this. When you go get your site plan approval, preliminary plat or preliminary PD approval, that you then know how many units you want to build. It's not a theoretical. It's not a max allowable pursuant to a comprehensive plan amendment or zoning amendment. To say, you can now vest. If you meet concurrency, you can pay your impact fees. If you don't, then there's this other tool that's available, and if it's in, like everything has been said, if it's in the capital improvement programs, you go forward. If it's not, you propose it. And if you, as a board, say, you know what, we don't want to do that, you then make that determination at that time. The other thing, I was listening to, talk about head spinning. It's a good thing your staff's a lot smarter than the rest of us, because they came up with a plan that seems to make sense. And I know Mr. Cox was here at the workshop and made some comments on the language. I don't need to reiterate all that. But I would point out specifically that your ordinance proposed says things like the proportionate fair share mitigation may include construction and contribution of facilities. So it's here, and when it comes to you, you all get to make that determination of how to do it, and that's something that gets worked out. It's very complicated. It's worked out with staff, the developers, everybody comes, there's presentations made. So everything y'all talked about is included in the language of your ordinance. And as has been said, this has to be adopted. The state has made this a mandate. You have to adopt a proportionate fair share. What I ask, and my clients would request, is that when you do so, you then treat everybody fairly and amend, if you're going to do this, amend your pending ordinance to what I guess what Bob said, where once you have your site plan approval, then you can go ahead and invest. If the concurrency is available, if not, then use a proportionate share. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any more comments? Ms. Alford.
Is that where we're getting with this?
Just in the interest of fair disclosure, Mr. Seymour has 3 clients that have sued us over the pending ordinance doctrine.
This slipped your mind.
But we won one of those, didn't we?
Further, I think the staff acknowledges that there's an anomaly here, that if there's a deficient link, proportionate share allows you to pay and vest, whereas if there's no deficiency, the pending ordinance doesn't allow you to pay until you're ready for a building permit. But we've been pending, we've held this ordinance from being changed because we're waiting for a consultant's report, which was commissioned in January and I think is due in a couple of weeks. And that report is supposed to give us advice on the best practices as to when people should be allowed to vest. And it may turn out to be when Mr. Seymour or Mr. Swift suggest is the appropriate time. But I don't think we should lift the pending ordinance now, even though it does create an anomaly. Given that the consultant is going to tell us how we should proceed within a couple of weeks, we can address it then.
Okay. Yes.
I would suggest, however, in response, one, the consultant, as I understood it, was going to talk about mostly how you count trips. Some of the when you vest may include in that. But what you're going to have in the meantime, before there's a change, because even if the consultant comes back in 2 weeks and says, here's what you ought to do, staff's then going to have to go prepare an ordinance. They're going to have to look at amendments. They're going to have to take things. It's going to be a couple of months. During that time, you're going to create a problem. And part of that problem is going to be that the proportionate share that you're about to adopt may become ineffective, and here's why. My clients, let's pick one. I have a client, I'm not going to name him, that is concurrent, has an approval. When they got approval, there was concurrency available, but they could not vest. Let's assume for a second that they can move forward, and concurrency for traffic is no longer available, and they can use the proportionate fair share. That only addresses the traffic concurrency problem. What happens if in 6 months concurrency for water or sewer isn't available? So now you've got infrastructure improvements for a project that can never be built. This assumes that you could even get the infrastructure improvements built without vested concurrency, which all indications are that you can't. What you have is someone coming in saying, we've got no concurrency available for roads, but we've got concurrency for other things. They get to vest. Our clients who have concurrency for everything don't, and have to take a risk that in the future, not only will road concurrency not be available, but concurrency for water, sewer, schools, and other things may not be available, and that can't be fixed by proportionate fair share agreement, in which case they're back where they started from, and they had concurrency. Even if the proportionate share does work, now they have to pay extra because this pending ordinance was in place, and you were treating people disparately. You were treating them differently. And you're saying, until we get the consultant's report, let's tell people that if you don't have concurrency, you're better off. And I don't think that's what the statement this county wants to make. It doesn't make sense. If when the consultant's report comes back, it determines that there may be a different time to vest other than at site plan approval, and I'd be very surprised by that, then you can make that change at that time. But while you move forward with this, all we're asking is you treat everybody the same. And if you change it later and how that impacts the proportionate share and everything else, you can make those determinations when the consultant does come back and you go through all the rounds of ordinance amendments that are going to be potentially available at that time. That's all we're asking. For now, treat everybody equally, whether they have concurrency or they don't.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you,
We're not
Mr.
afraid.
Seymour. Go ahead.
We're not afraid to use the pending ordinance in the event that we get the stuff, the information from the consultant, and as we see how this boils down. And I mean, it's never been any of this board's intent is to hurt somebody up here that is trying to put in or through the method of concurrency. That's not our intent. Our intent was to clearly to level the playing field, to do exactly the opposite of what you're saying. And yes, once the Senate Bill 360 or the proportionate share by this commission is adopted, then there is that disparity, and we could address that immediately instead of having to go through the entire typical process. That
and the playing field would certainly be leveled
exactly
by doing what Bob suggested.
Exactly.
Okay. I assume there's no one. Oh, Ms. Knapp. I'd forgotten you were.
I'm not much, but I'm something. But I don't have a dog in the fight, so. Nancy Offit, just an observation or two on behalf of the builders. Of course, this is being discussed statewide, we understand, and one of the things that the builders have a concern about is just that the proximity, the distance of roads designated as being deficient from the particular project, that methodology be reasonable and accurate, of course. And also that the county have a good faith, take a good faith approach in implementing this, so far as I understand you're not going to approve something where the current currency isn't there. You're not going to add it to the 5-year plan if you definitely disagree with it, so you've got that discretion. But I do hope that when you do agree to add something to the plan, that you do use the other resources of the county to make sure that it is feasible, that you don't just say, well, sorry, it's not feasible. And also, if Mr. Barber's comments were to say that impact fees are inflationary, I think I have to agree with him, but I'm not sure that's what he said. There's one specific where Bob, on page, where is it here? On 8B, where you changed it so that the effective date is the date of the agreement. I don't know what that does. The prior sentence says that everything has to be paid prior to the effective date. And I don't know.
Well, that means it's paid earlier.
Right, I understand.
Okay, I didn't know if you were.
But it also says no refunds up here, so I don't know whether that's something that Joe came up with.
What we'll have in the actual proportionate share agreement is a provision that the funds or the deeded land, if it's for right-of-way, be placed into escrow prior to the matter going to the board. If the board approves the agreement, which I believe they're compelled to unless it involves a comp plan amendment, then the funds and the deeds come out of escrow. If it does involve a comp plan amendment which is denied, the money would be returned to the developer from escrow.
All right, thank you. So it's a way of getting the roads built so that progress can continue. Progress, I shouldn't have used that word, so can happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Anyone else wish to be heard? All right, I'm going to close the public hearing.
Move staff recommendation.
I'll second that, Mr. Chairman.
One question, please. Do we have a mechanism in this that would allow us to revisit and adjust the formula as necessary?
Nothing unique in this ordinance, but if there is a glitch or a problem, we could always come back, and we will.
Okay.
Have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? I assume you're ready to vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Item 9A3.
Break for the thing?
Yeah.
15 minutes.
15 minutes. Consideration of proposed amendment to chapters 913 and 914, posted sign notice for conventional development projects. Mr. Bowling?
Good morning. I'm Stan Bowling, County Planning Director. Under current county land development requirements, special notice is given and provided for items that are public hearing matters, such as comprehensive plan amendments and rezonings, special exceptions, and plan developments. That special notice includes posting a sign on a property.
Could we take the conversations outside, please? I'm sorry, Stan, go ahead.
Thank you. That special notice for public hearing type of items includes letters to surrounding property owners, an ad in the newspaper, and posting of a sign on the property. However, for conventional projects that are standard projects, standard site plans and subdivisions, that sort of thing, those are more technical in nature. They're not discretionary items. They're not public hearings. And there is no special notice to surrounding property owners of any type. The Planning and Zoning Commission last fall recommended to the board, and the board agreed, that the county would basically try some type of notice as simple as possible for these conventional projects. And the idea being that that notice would be a posted sign on a development project site, even if it's not a public hearing, and at least let surrounding residents get an idea of what's coming. At the time that that was proposed, staff had some concerns about some of the logistics of notice outside of a public hearing type of issue, for a technical type of issue. Staff's main concern was that we did not want to frustrate citizens by inviting them to come to a meeting where their input, had to either be technical in nature or really could not be part of the decision-making itself. But the way that this has been structured, and staff has taken some of the ideas from the Planning and Zoning Commission and structured this notice, is to make it simple. And that would be that applicants that are going to be coming in front of the Planning and Zoning Commission for a subdivision or site plan conventional project would have to post a type of notice by sign on their property, actually right before they submit a formal application. What we want to do in this process is to actually have surrounding residents get a very simple message on the sign, and to have the sign up for at least 3 weeks early in the process. The sign itself would state what type of development it is, a residential development, and for information, contact and give the phone number of the applicant or the developer, and insert the name of the project. To be very simple on the sign, because in staff's opinion, the early in the process as possible to have residents or citizens contact the applicant or developer is actually the best situation for a couple of reasons. One is, early in the process, a developer applicant has the most flexibility to make any changes, has more time for them to talk to citizens, and actually, when citizens contact staff, more time before final decisions are made. So we think that the timing of the way that this amendment is structured is good. It won't slow down the process for any applicant. It's actually integrated into the existing process that we have now. The Professional Services Advisory Committee looked at this proposal and had a 3-3 vote on that, which really doesn't give a whole lot of guidance, but I think some of the concerns were, well, this is another regulation. why don't we have staff contact people? There actually was some different discussions on what would be the best way to handle this. The Planning and Zoning Commission looked at this proposal and recommended 6-0 that you all adopt this. And I think it'd be fair just to represent that an understanding from the Planning and Zoning Commission to give this a try and see how this works. In fact, the way that staff has structured this is to have applicants give us an idea as they go through the process what type of contacts, if any, that they've had from people who've seen the sign and what the results are. So we've actually tried to build in a little bit of feedback into the requirement and tried to make it fairly simple. Just to go through quickly what this would apply to, there are two parts of our ordinances that are affected by this requirement: subdivisions and conventional site plans that go before the Planning and Zoning Commission. The posting of the sign, and this is from the ordinance copy itself, it would be the same for site plan or for subdivision, whether it's a residential or commercial project, the type of the development, and the contact number of the applicant. All the sizes of the sign and the lettering sizes that are in the recommendations are the same sizes that are associated with our rezoning signs. I'm holding one up here now, and that's just basically the size of real estate type of sign, but it does get the message across. The 2-inch lettering that's recommended is what you see, hopefully can see, rezoning. If you guys can't see it, it's not a big enough size. But that's what we we won't put prop share ordinances on the sign. But that's the gist of the requirements, and we hope to see that there are some advantages, and we should get that information over the next several months as these apply to new applications and see how this notice requirement works, or if it does work. And so staff's recommendation is that the board adopt the proposal as structured. I'd be glad to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Stan. Any questions of staff? All right, I'll open the public hearing. Anyone in the public care to speak on this item? Public hearing is closed.
Move approval.
We have a motion for staff recommendation. Discussion? All in favor? Do we have, no? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. And item 9A4, second public hearing on the extension of moratorium on small lot single-family subdivisions. Have any comments?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. This moratorium was imposed in October for a 6-month period. The Growth Awareness Committee and another committee working on the issues of affordable and workforce housing had proposed some modifications to restrict the use of small-scale developments to projects that could deliver affordable housing. They have not completed their work. I believe they've got some drafts that they're working with the staff on, and they've requested an additional extension of time on this moratorium. As drafted, it would be a 6-month moratorium. If the modifications that they suggest come forward sooner, the moratorium can be lifted when a new small-scale subdivision ordinance is in place.
Thank you. Any questions of staff? I'll open the public hearing. Anyone from the public would like to be heard? Yes, Mr. Paladin.
Just to bring you an update on our progress on the paperwork on this small lot subdivision moratorium. Andrew Bowler is very close to getting us all of his notes and outlines as to what he would like to see incorporated in this, and this is information directly coming from Ed White's committee that was assembled quite a while ago. So once we have that, which should be within a week or so, we should take another week or so and get it to staff, and then I feel that we'll be able to get back to you in a fairly quick time. So we are working on it as we speak, but we wanted to incorporate those comments so that we didn't contradict something that came out later. So we're not way far off from being able to submit this back to staff.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else under public hearing? Public hearing is closed.
Move staff recommendation.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. We will now take about a 5-minute break and come back at noon. Calling the meeting back to order, 12 o'clock. Under public discussion items, 9B1, request to speak from Glenn W. Legwin regarding county's use of selective code enforcement. This was postponed from a meeting of April 4th at Mr. Legwin's request. Is Mr. Legwin here? I think he had to leave to go to work. All right, we'll reschedule him for next week. Item 9B2, request to speak from Les Waller regarding discussion and consideration related to code enforcement case number 200-309-0137. Mr. Waller?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. I'm Les Waller, the owner of Indian River MRI, located on 37th Street. This little project has been going on for several years. We did an addition at our facility. We had a situation where we had hired a company to perform the landscaping renovations that were required on the addition, and they did not perform as per their contract. There have been several discussions, I guess, in front of the Commission in the past. We have since rectified all the situations that had occurred, and the county has signed off on all the tree requirements and the landscaping that was necessary. There was a fine that was imposed, and the only thing that we're asking is if there's some way that the commissioners can look at reducing the fine to their actual costs that were associated with whatever they had to do to oversee the fine that they needed to impose upon us. In consideration for that, there's some things that we thought that we should bring up that had not been discussed in previous discussions. We have been paying for a water meter and sewer meters at our facility for the past 5 years that have not been available to us. When we originally built the project, there was only supposed to be one water meter and sewer connection to our facility. We questioned why we were being billed for a 5-year period, and we were told that there were 2 meters and 2 sewer connections at our facility. Then about 2 years ago, we took it upon ourselves to question this once again, and when we talked to the county, the people over the utility department, they insisted that we were hooked up to 2 separate meters, and we come to find out just a year ago, I had asked someone from the utilities department to come out there and physically walk me around the property and show me where the connections were. Well, they did come out and look, and they finally verified that there was only one connection. So for 5 years, we were paying for services that we're not utilizing. They did try to make amends by offering to refund the impact fees, and we appreciate that. But we did, pay out some substantial amount of monies over the 5-year period that really were not being utilized by our facility. So all I'm asking is if you would please consider something when you, on this $4,400 fine that is being imposed upon us, to at least please take in consideration, what we have already spent for services not rendered, and just give us, a fair shake on it, if you would, please.
Thank you, Mr. Waller.
Can I address the utility?
Well, somebody, either you or
well, I think first of all we need to meet on it, because if they ask him to refund impact fees, that means he reserved capacity and was paying a base facility charge, which everyone has to do. If he doesn't want to pay that base facility charge every month, he should ask for a refund of his impact fees if he doesn't need that capacity, so someone else can buy it. So that's standard in our ordinance, and I need to meet with him. The first time I thought he was here for his code enforcement violation, but I'd like to meet with him and make sure he was treated properly, because if he wasn't, we'll look at a refund. But I think that should be treated as a separate issue from the code enforcement violation. They're not even interrelated.
Okay, does that satisfy everyone to have Mr. Waller meet with Mr. Baird?
Yes.
Okay.
If I can make one comment, going through, I was just handed this. I haven't had an opportunity of looking at what transpired through code enforcement. And I noticed November 24th in 2003, he'd given 60 days to comply. January 26, 2004, he was given an additional 30 days to comply. February 23rd, 2004, he was given an additional extension, 30 days to comply. March 22nd, 2004, another 30-day extension. So I total that as 150 days to come in compliance with the landscaping. And I've said time and time again that we've got to get our hands and fingers around code enforcement and extension upon extension upon extension. Why do we even incur fines? Why do we put a $100 a day fine on something that we're not using? So I do have a problem with lessening this fine. I think rules are in place to take care of. He's had 150 days to comply with that. I think he needs to pay the fine.
I noticed he didn't show up for 4 of those hearings out of the 7 or 8. Mr. Waller?
Yes. At the time, I had an administrator that was attending some of the meetings here, and it was passed down to the administrator that we were going to go ahead and bring this into compliance. The problem we had is the company that was doing the project for us kept saying that they were having a problem locating the trees that were required to meet the compliance. We later found out that the company went out of business, and therefore we had to go with an alternate source. And all along, the administrator that was in charge with our company was trying to stay on top of things, and we thought that we were, handling things in a timely fashion based on the situation with the right size trees that were not available.
Well, what I recommend, I agree about the fine. We ought to leave the fine be. But if we owe him money and he owes us money, it might be a wash. So why don't you...
I don't think we owe him money.
I think we have to be careful. This is a separate issue, and I think the other one he could cut us a check for the code enforcement violation. We will look at the utilities. When they tell him if he doesn't use that capacity, just refund the impact fee, that means he's getting a base facility based on the capacity that he has reserved. I need to talk to him. I don't...
Why don't you make an appointment with Joe, and we'll postpone this for a week and see what happens.
Actually, Mr. Chairman, too, if I could comment, looking at the bottom one, it does say that he complied 44 days after the board extended the compliance, so he, in reality, had 194 days.
Okay.
So
I think you should take action on this separate. The utility matters totally separate.
I think we could, I agree. I think we should address this, and if that's the case, he can cut a check, and if we're wrong on the utilities, we can cut a check. It'll all be a wash.
I'd make a motion that the fine stay in place.
Second.
Moved and second. Any discussion? Go ahead.
Mr. Waller, whenever you came, it's been about what? Is it about the April 04 date whenever you came to talk to me about this?
It was in September, October timeframe.
And at the time, that was almost a $45,000 lien, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
That's correct.
And you asked me what I suggested, and I suggested you get with staff, and now I'm understanding that staff has already reduced it to this?
No, not in essence. I think that was something that they, had already agreed to. That was something we're
and you had some extenuating circumstances. We had the hurricanes and everything like that, and so okay, I'm ready for the question. I'm gonna stick.
We had a
with
$45,000 fine.
Yeah, there was a substantial fine at one time.
Okay, are you ready to vote on this?
Yes.
All right, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Get with Mr. Baird on the other item, would you please?
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, request to speak from Joe Paladin regarding section 952.08 right-of-way requirement.
Hello, Commissioners. We've heard a couple people already here today comment on right-of-way problems, and this directly addresses that situation. Ordinance 952 is acquisition of right-of-way. If you remember, the Growth Awareness Committee brought this before you a little over a year ago, and we wound up pulling it because, we couldn't actually agree on the wording, and actually the county attorney's office said there was some wording in there they found unconstitutional, basically. So we've worked on this quite hard, And we've had input from Jim Davis. We have input from your staff, Mr. Keating, Mr. Stan Bowling. We've also met with Bill DeBrawl, the Assistant County Attorney, and he helped me write some of this. And we met with Mike Zito, and he helped me on some of this. And we've met with the various commissioners from time to time. And I think we brought before you something that can be accepted, and we're not asking for a pending ordinance on this. We're not pushing the envelope on this. We just like to get this into effect as soon as possible, because I think this is going to make the acquisition of your right-of-ways clearer and easier to, enforce. And the things that we addressed in here that are very important, in my opinion. One of the things we did is we didn't leave out the single-family residence, because in several instances we've had acquisitions in right-of-way lately where it did affect single-family residencies. So we're saying that, that has to be included in the acquisitions of our right-of-ways. If it's a 5-acre estate or a 1-acre lot or whatever it is, if we're going to need right-of-way, we'd like to see that negotiated and bought. And we also put wording in there as to how the appraisal should be done, and we put wording in there on when it should be done. We've addressed, I think, all the issues that have been coming up more and more so to make it real clear on how it's done. And any adjustments that staff wants to make on this, we've had some conversation with them, and we've agreed to go ahead and let them change any words that they'd like to finalize this thing and bring it through your regular channels. So any input you all might have with the backup I submitted, I'm willing to go ahead and answer those questions if I could, but I'd just like for your recommendation to staff to go ahead and bring this through, and whatever changes they want to make, we're happy to work with them. Thank you.
I think it goes without saying that you can go ahead and do that and bring it up through the channels.
I think you need to add shall and may.
Shall and may. Of course.
Correctly.
We did that in blue and red letters, but we kept crossing them out. So,
How about maybe?
Now, we didn't add that one, Gary, but I'll work on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Paladin. I'm going to ask Kim to read the public notice items, and then I'm going to ask Vice Chairman to take over the meeting, because I have an appointment that I need to get in a half hour.
9BC, notice of scheduled public hearings for April 18, 2006. Board consideration to approve purchase of the Captain Butcher Inc. parcels of the Archie Smith Johnny Mays Fish House Environmental Land Acquisition Project. This matter is administrative. 9C2, notice of scheduled public hearing for April 18, 2006. Application for a cable television system license by Lightstream Holdings, LLC. Request approval in the issuance of a cable television license to operate a cable television system within the unincorporated areas of Indian River County. This matter is administrative. 9C3A, notice of scheduled public hearings for May 2, 2006. Indian River Exchange Packers, Inc. Request to amend the comprehensive plan to realign the urban service area boundary and to redesignate plus or minus 18 acres located at the southeast corner of the 9th Street Southwest Oslo Road and 74th Avenue from AG1 to C/I, Commercial Industrial, and to rezone those plus or minus 18 acres from A1 to IL. This matter is legislative. County initiated request to amend the text of the conservation element, the portable water sub-element, and the sanitary sewer sub-element of the comprehensive plan. This matter is legislative. 9C3C, county initiated request to amend the capital improvements element of the comprehensive plan. This matter is legislative. 9C3D, county initiated request to amend the transportation element of the comprehensive plan. This matter is legislative.
Thank you, Kim. The next item will be Public Works. That's item I1, continuing contract agreement for professional services with GK Environmental Incorporated. Work order number IRDN number 1 for Indian River Drive North Sidewalk Improvements, Indian River County Project number 0202, memorandum dated March 21st, 2006, found on pages 314 through 320.
Move staff recommendation.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? If not, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Utility services, item J. Hella A. Shalhoub, Medical Office Building Development Agreement for construction of an off-site water main, memorandum dated March 28, 2006, found on pages 321 through 331.
So moved.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries. Under Commissioner items, I'm the only one with an item today, and that is the Architectural Review Committee for planning for the planned developments, and memorandum dated March 29, 2006. So and this is my item, and what I am asking is for this commission to give direction to staff to take a look at the pros and cons of an architectural committee for planned developments. I think it'll be a little more difficult in non-planned developments. We've been running into a lot of this with two-story homes, setbacks, separations, what type of architectural design we want or is acceptable. And I think it has merit to have that, but I'd like to look at both sides of the issue, and I'm suggesting that we have staff do that and bring back a recommendation, whether it's good or bad for this county and what we're doing.
Can't make a motion, can you?
No.
Do you want consensus, or do you want a motion?
Hold on, I'm enjoying this moment for just a minute. I'm going to savor this.
Can we sit here for about 5 minutes and just see him squirm because he can't make them? You know, I have no problem with that.
Out of order.
Well, some of the staff, no. I have no problem with that. Do I, Mr. Chairman,
Oh, that hurts, doesn't it?
Commissioner Davis, could you let the chairman know? No, I have no problem with maybe bringing this forward with some ideas to staff. And I don't know if that's something they can handle internal if we need to form a new committee. But I think there's some good points to this. And as much as I do agree with this one on Mr. Wheeler, I have no problem with that.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I don't think it's appropriate for the county to get in the term that you use as far as architectural review, the way it's used in the industry, is you have a deed restricted community. In that deed restricted community, you have a architectural review committee that tells you that you can't paint a house pink, or I think that's, if that's where we're wanting to go with this, that's not where I want to be with this. Where I think you want to be with this is, and I don't mean to put words in your mouth, or better, so I'll just say where I would like to look.
Don't stutter.
Okay, thank you. Is for this community knows the kind of development that it doesn't want. It's more of the cookie cutter style of housing that really infringes on the streetscape as we drive by new development. And I think that that's where a lot of the discussion about all two-story homes comes in. Mm-hmm. And as far as the debate of whether the bonus room is a two-story home and they're circumventing our rule or our requests, I guess you could say. I don't know if the term that we're trying to use is the architectural review or the lot placement of two-story structures in a subdivision. And so I guess with that, I'd like for the county staff, I think they understand what I'm trying to get across. I don't want a Lakes of Sand, or not a Lakes of Sand Ridge, that's a different issue. I don't want an Eagle Trace, the Carriage Lake situation, and those are one of those is what I'd call a cookie cutter style housing, and the other one is what I'd call a highly inappropriate wall of two-story houses that create a tunnel effect down a major corridor in our community. Now, and I just don't want this architectural review committee idea to be drifting off the reservation in an area of choosing house colors for individuals in this community. That is totally inappropriate for this commission to even be considering.
Would you repeat that? No, I agree, and I think, and where we're at with this, and I'm simply asking, because we've had a lot of discussion at P&Z, if you watch those meetings, and also here, and our PDs is a trade-off. We have a lot of authority in the PDs, and I think staff could come back with some recommendations about addressing some of our concerns to have some consistency. And we've also had some things that either have or were added after P&Z approved something and came here. It's happened a few times. And I just think that with the PDs, they're pretty tightly controlled. Everything's a swap-off, trade-off. And I think it's something that we can look at. So, and I don't have any specific recommendations, but I'd like to look at the pros and cons, see whether this will work for us or whether it won't. I'm just asking for a consensus to have staff bring something back to us to look at.
I think that would be appropriate, and let's go forward with that.
Is that something we need a motion on?
I think a consensus would.
Just a consensus of it?
Or a motion.
As long as the staff understands what you want and they're shaking their heads yes.
I think they're pretty much doing it now.
Yeah.
point.
Okay.
Thank you.
Then there is a consensus. Okay, and the next item, you'll be pleased to hear, is adjournment.
No, you didn't ask each commissioners if they had any items under their, like.
He's new at this.
I'm reserving that for councilmen.
I would just like, before you adjourn, I'd just like to make a comment that the Indian River Select United soccer team, the under-18 team, is playing a team from England today out at Hobart, and that's at 5 o'clock. So obviously, if any of the public is not busy at 5 o'clock, you're more than welcome to see how the English-style soccer is played.
They played on the left-hand side of the road, don't they?
They do.
That's right.
Good job. Good job, Mr. Chairman. Golly.